You've been told to take control of your life, to plan every detail, to chase certainty like it's the only way to survive. But if that really worked, why are so many people still exhausted, still frustrated, still feeling like they're gripping too tightly to a world that refuses to be held? Why does control bring more fear, more tension, more sleepless nights? The truth is, most of what happens in life isn't yours to control. Not the past, not other people, not even your next breath. But that's not a reason to panic. It's the beginning of peace. Buddhist wisdom doesn't teach you how to control more. It teaches you how to suffer less, how to let go, not by force, but by understanding. Not by fighting the storm, but by learning how to float through it calmly, wisely, with a mind that doesn't resist every wave but rides it with grace. Tonight, you're not just going to fall asleep. You're going to let go of something heavy. Maybe a thought, maybe a fear, maybe the illusion that you had to hold it all together by yourself. As you listen, your mind will slow, your chest will soften, your breath will deepen, and something deep inside will whisper, "It's okay to let go." The teachings you'll hear are not just words, they are keys. Keys that unlock a quieter mind, a lighter heart, a freer life. Are you ready to stop holding on to what was never yours to carry? Then close your eyes and let's begin. You've just discovered the truth about control, that peace doesn't come from holding tighter, it comes from seeing clearer. And now it's time to go even deeper, because the biggest source of your stress, it's not the chaos out there, it's the commentary inside your head. And it all begins with one simple question: what moves, the wind or the flag? Two monks stood under a fluttering flag. One said, "It's the wind that moves." The other said, "No, it's the flag that moves." They went back and forth, certain they were right. Then their teacher passed by. He listened, smiled, and said, "Neither the wind nor the flag is moving. It is the mind that moves." It sounds like a riddle, but it's a mirror, because what moves first is not the flag or the wind, it's your mind. That's what jumps, that's what judges, that's what attaches meaning to every little thing, and that's what makes you suffer. You think you're seeing reality. You're not. You're seeing your version of it, your filter, your mental subtitles, automatically added before you even realize they're there. Someone doesn't reply to your message, and your mind jumps. They're ignoring me. A stranger looks at you for too long. They're judging me. A door slams. Someone's mad at me. But none of that is fact. It's your mind moving, trying to protect you by explaining things. But in explaining, it distorts. And distortion is exhausting. Because now you're reacting not to the world, but to your interpretation of it. And the more convinced you are that your story is true, the more stuck you get in emotions that never needed to be there. Fear, guilt, shame, jealousy. These aren't the result of what happened. They're the result of what you told yourself about what happened. That's where Buddhist wisdom cuts through. It doesn't ask you to control your thoughts. It asks you to stop believing them. It asks you to pause, to notice the mind moving, and to stop chasing it every time it runs. The monk's answer wasn't clever, it was compassionate. He was pointing to the real problem, not what's moving outside, but what's jumping inside. That jump, that mental leap from what is to what it must mean, is where suffering hides. And it happens fast, faster than logic, faster than breath. A sound, a word, a glance, a delay, and you've already labeled it. But what if you didn't? What if you let things move without needing to name them? That's the practice. Not resisting the flag, not denying the wind, just noticing the mind and choosing not to follow every movement, choosing not to interpret every breeze as a storm. Because the more you interpret, the more tightly you grip, and the more you grip, the more fragile you become. Every story must be defended. Every belief must be confirmed. Every judgment must be proven right, until your whole life becomes a courtroom and your peace is on trial. But peace doesn't need to be defended, and the truth doesn't need to win an argument. It just needs space, stillness, awareness. The wind moves, the flag flaps, the mind narrates. But beneath all of that is something that doesn't move. The part of you that watches, the part of you that sees without naming, hears without judging, and breathes without grasping. That's the part Buddhism brings you back to, the still point, the observer, the one who doesn't need to interpret because it's already enough to just see. So how does this work in real life? It looks like hearing someone criticize you and choosing not to take it personally. It looks like waking up with anxiety and letting it pass through you instead of calling it a bad day. It looks like listening more and explaining less, reacting slower, judging softer. It looks like saying, maybe I don't know, and being okay with that. That's freedom. Because the opposite of control isn't chaos. It's trust. It's clarity. It's the quiet power of not needing to label everything that moves. You can still have preferences. You can still speak your truth, but you're not clinging to it like a life raft. You're not trying to make everyone agree. You're not panicking when someone sees it differently. Because you're grounded in awareness, not in your latest thought. And here's where it gets even deeper. Even realizing the mind moves can become another interpretation, another trap. Your ego grabs it and says, okay, so I need to stop the mind from moving. But that's just another movement, another flag in the wind. You can't quiet the mind by forcing it. You quiet the mind by watching it. Let the thoughts be there. Just don't become them. Let the opinions float by. Just don't build your identity around them. You don't need to win mental debates. You need to step outside of them entirely. Think of a sky with clouds. You don't argue with the clouds. You don't chase them. You don't try to rearrange them. You just see them. You're the sky. The thoughts are clouds. Let them pass. This doesn't make you passive. It makes you precise, present, fully here. Because when you're no longer distracted by what you think things mean, you finally start seeing what they actually are. You stop assuming what people feel. You stop predicting what tomorrow will bring. You stop analyzing every emotion, and you start living right here, in this breath, in this space, in this quiet place behind the noise. The mind will still move. That's what minds do. But now, you're not the one moving with it. You're watching, calm, steady, unshaken. And in that stillness, you find something wild, peace. Not because life got easier, but because you're no longer trying to translate every moment into a story you can control. You've dropped the commentary. You've released the need to label. And you've remembered that the truth doesn't speak in words. It speaks in silence, stillness, presence. So the next time you feel tension rise, ask yourself, what am I believing right now? What story is playing in my head? What if I didn't need a story? What if this moment didn't need to mean anything at all? Let go of the interpretation, and the emotion often lets go of you. That's the real shift. Not fixing the world, but no longer reacting to your mental version of it. Not controlling what others do, but releasing what you tell yourself it means. This is what the monk was pointing to. The stillness beneath the flag, the silence behind the wind, the awareness that isn't moved. Even when everything else island, you don't need to stop the wind. You don't need to pin the flag down. You just need to remember you're not the movement. You're the space that sees it. You're not the storm. You're the sky. And the more you rest there, the less you need to interpret. You stop needing closure. You stop needing everyone to agree. You stop turning your mind into a courtroom and your thoughts into laws. You start letting people be people, moments be moments, life be life. And that's when real peace shows up, quietly, naturally, without force. It's not the result of solving everything. It's what rises when you stop turning everything into a problem to solve. The mind moves, but you don't have to follow. You don't have to analyze. You don't have to grip. You can just watch the flag, feel the wind, breathe, and be. That's enough. It's always been enough. And now, you know how to return to that place. Whenever the mind moves, just come back. Back to the one who sees. Back to the stillness. Back to the truth. No flag. No wind. No interpretation. Just peace. So now you know the truth behind stillness. Not everything needs a meaning. Not every thought deserves belief. And peace begins where interpretation ends. But here's the next trap the mind falls into. Even if it stops labeling what happens, it still clings to what it hopes will happen. It drops the story, only to grip the outcome. And that's where suffering sneaks back in. Because control isn't just about what's happening now, it's also the exhausting need to shape what comes next. That's where we go next. Not into resistance, but into flexibility. Not into chasing outcomes, but learning how to float above them like a reed in floodwaters. When everything around you feels uncertain, the instinct is to brace, to stiffen, to plan harder, to grip the wheel. But some storms don't respond to planning. Some waters rise too fast. Some outcomes never follow the script. And in those moments, strength isn't found in force, it's found in pliancy, in softness, in becoming like a reed that bends without breaking. The reed doesn't try to control the flood. It doesn't resist the current. It bends, it flows, it yields. Not because it's weak, but because it understands something most people don't. When you're flexible, you survive. When you're soft, you last. And when you stop fighting the wave, you realize the wave was never the enemy. The Buddha once said that suffering arises from craving and clinging, wanting things to be different, needing a specific result, demanding a certain future. That's where the mind begins to panic. It clings to plans like lifeboats, not realizing the tight grip is what's dragging it under. Letting go of attachment to outcomes doesn't mean giving up. It doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you care without needing things to go your way. You still plant seeds. You still show up. You still give your all. But you stop tying your worth to the harvest. You stop measuring your value by what you achieve. You stop trying to twist life into a shape it was never meant to hold. A reed doesn't fail when it bends. It survives. And your soul doesn't fail when it surrenders. It awakens. Think about how many times you've suffered because things didn't go the way you wanted. You thought a relationship would last, it didn't. You worked hard for something, it failed. You gave your heart to a plan, it crumbled. But the suffering wasn't just the loss, it was your attachment to how it was supposed to be. You didn't just lose a job, you lost the identity you built around it. You didn't just face a breakup, you faced the death of a future you'd already imagined. But here's the question: did that outcome ever belong to you? Life is not a vending machine. You don't put in effort and automatically get what you expect. Sometimes you give your all and life gives you silence. Sometimes you do everything right and still lose. That's not failure, that's nature. And the more you fight it, the more you hurt. Non-attachment doesn't mean becoming cold. It means staying warm, even when the world doesn't warm you back. It means giving love without needing it returned. Acting with purpose, without obsessing over recognition. Showing up fully and letting life unfold, even if it doesn't unfold the way you planned. The reed doesn't resist the river, it surrenders to it. And in doing so, it outlasts the trees that snapped in the wind. That's what Buddhist practice teaches: how to be soft without collapsing, how to be present without control, how to live fully, even when life is anything but certain. The storm will come, the waters will rise, life will break the rules you thought it followed, but your peace isn't found in predicting the flood. It's found in learning how to float when it comes. Non-attachment is not the same as detachment. Detachment shuts down. Non-attachment opens up. It's not apathy. It's aliveness without conditions. It's showing up for the moment without demanding anything from it. It's loving what is without needing it to stay. Every time you cling to an outcome, you chain your joy to something outside yourself. You say, "I'll be okay if this happens. I'll be happy when this works. I'll love myself once I succeed." But that's not freedom. That's a prison disguised as ambition. Letting go doesn't make you powerless. It makes you powerful in a different way. It gives you the strength to be at peace even when things fall apart. The ability to remain kind even when things don't work out. The grace to keep moving without dragging the weight of broken expectations behind you. And it begins by seeing how often your tension is tied to your timeline. How often your anxiety rises not because of what is, but because of what isn't. The future you thought you needed. The result you were counting on. The scenario you rehearsed 100 times in your head. And when it doesn't happen, the crash isn't just disappointment, it's identity loss. But who are you if not your outcomes? Buddhist wisdom says, you are not your achievements, not your failures, not the roles you play or the things you possess. You are awareness, presence, compassion, in motion. And none of that is tied to how things unfold. The reed is still a reed, even when the water rises. When you stop needing the world to validate you, you finally start feeling whole. Non-attachment gives you back the present, because now you're not living for a future that may never come. You're not rejecting this moment just because it's not the one you ordered. You're here, alive, awake, and that's enough. Letting go of outcomes doesn't mean drifting through life without goals. It means having goals that don't own you, desires that don't define you, plans that don't punish you. You can want things, but you don't need to collapse if they don't happen. That's real strength, and it's rare, because most people think strength means control. Buddhism says strength means surrender. It's the courage to do your part and release the rest. The willingness to try and not fall apart if it fails. The maturity to show up and accept what comes. A reed doesn't float because it has no roots. It floats because it knows when to yield. And your peace won't come from fighting life. It will come from learning how to flow with it, to stop swimming against the current of what already island, to trust that even the flood has its place, that even this mess is shaping something. Non-attachment isn't passive, it's fiercely intentional. It takes presence to act without clinging. It takes mindfulness to care without controlling. It takes wisdom to pursue something with your whole heart and then let it go with open hands. Can you give your best and not hate yourself if it fails? Can you love deeply and not fall to pieces if they leave? Can you walk your path and not demand a straight line? That's the test. That's the practice. And that's where real peace begins. Because the truth is, outcomes lie. Success doesn't always make you happy. Failure doesn't always ruin you. Sometimes the worst thing that happens is the best thing for your growth. And sometimes the thing you thought would save you becomes the very thing that breaks you. So why keep attaching to what you can't predict? Why chain your joy to what you can't control? There's a deeper joy waiting underneath all that effort. A lighter way of being. A softer kind of power. The kind that doesn't bend reality to its will, but bends itself with grace when reality shifts. The kind that doesn't need to fight the current because it knows how to float. And floating is not giving up. It's staying up. It's staying open. It's staying kind when the plan changes. Staying calm when the storm hits. Staying you no matter what happens. That's the wisdom of the reed. And it's in you already. So stop resisting. Stop overthinking. Stop waiting for life to go your way before you allow peace. Let it rise. Let it change. Let it go. And float. Letting go of outcomes opens the door to something deeper. You start to realize that peace doesn't just come from releasing expectations, it comes from releasing the one who had the expectations in the first place. The tension wasn't just in the future you were clinging to. It was in the identity that needed the future to prove something. It was never just about what happens. It was about who you think it's happening to. And that's where the illusion hides in the self. The one you keep trying to protect, fix, defend, control. But what if that self isn't as solid as you think? There's a quiet teaching at the heart of Buddhism that most people avoid because it doesn't give easy comfort. It doesn't flatter the ego or sugarcoat reality. It whispers a truth that can shake your whole foundation, and yet, in that shaking, you find a freedom that nothing else can offer. The teaching is simple. There is no fixed self, no permanent you, no unchanging core inside that needs to control, win, succeed, or be right. And the moment you stop trying to protect that false center, life becomes lighter. The doctrine of anatta no self is not about denying your existence. It's about seeing clearly that what you call you is a process, not a person, a flow, not a fixture. Thoughts, feelings, memories, roles, preferences, all moving, changing, shifting, rearranging. And the suffering begins the moment you try to hold those pieces together as if they form a single solid thing, as if they define a self that must be maintained, defended, and proven. But that self is always slipping. You try to be confident, but self-doubt creeps in. You try to be kind, but anger shows up. You try to be strong, but grief knocks you over. And every time that happens, you suffer not just because of the emotion, but because it feels like a threat to your identity, as if something is wrong with you, as if you've failed to be consistent. But there's nothing wrong. That's what life, island-shifting winds, rising and falling tides. Emotions that come and go, roles that appear and fade. There was never a solid you to lose, only a process to witness. When you let go of the illusion of a fixed self, control starts to lose its grip. Because if there's no permanent self to protect, there's nothing to defend. You don't need to win every argument. You don't need to control every outcome. You don't need to constantly prove your worth. There's no you at the center of the storm, just weather, passing conditions, temporary clouds. The sky is untouched. Most of the pain you carry doesn't come from the world. It comes from the story of who you think you're supposed to be. You get attached to an idea, a version of yourself, and then life doesn't match it. Someone disrespects you. A failure happens. A plan falls through. And it's not just inconvenient. It feels personal, like an attack on your identity. But when you see there's no solid self to protect, those moments lose their weight. The arrow still strikes, but it doesn't sink so deep. You're not broken when things fall apart. You're just mistaking a passing experience for who you are. You're not your sadness. You're not your anger. You're not your success, your past, your fears, or your plans. You are the awareness that sees them. And that awareness doesn't need to control. It just witnesses. It doesn't grasp, it understands. Ego is the voice that says, I need to be in charge. But it's also the voice that says, I am the one being hurt. It's the one that attaches to every compliment and takes every insult as a wound. It builds itself on stories, and then spends its life defending them. But all it's defending is a reflection, a collection of thoughts about who you are. And those thoughts change, which means the identity they're built on changes too. When the Buddha taught no self, he wasn't trying to confuse people, he was offering liberation. Because if there's no self to cling to, there's nothing to hold back, nothing to fix, nothing to maintain. Just experience unfolding moment by moment. You get to release the pressure of being someone. You don't have to get it right. You don't have to hold it all together. You don't have to prove your worth through achievements, relationships, or perfection. You're not the actor on stage trying to stay in character. You're the space where the play is being watched. The more you relax into that, the more control becomes irrelevant. Because you're not trying to manage a story anymore, you're letting go of the need to have one. You're letting go of the question, who am I? And living the answer in silence. This doesn't make you numb, it makes you clear. Because when you're no longer focused on protecting an identity, you can actually connect. Listen without defensiveness. Speak without fear. Move through life without armor. You stop being the center of everything, and strangely, that makes you feel more alive. Because now, you're part of it all. Not separate, not isolated, just another wave in the sea, another leaf on the tree. And in that surrender, you find peace. Anatta doesn't erase your personality. It reveals it as a dance, not a statue, a song, not a structure. You're not static, you're streaming. And the less you fight that, the more at ease you feel. All your roles become lighter. You can be a parent, a partner, a worker, a dreamer, without being defined by any of it. When a role changes, you don't fall apart. Because you were never just that one thing. You were always more and less. You were always something wider than any title, something deeper than any name. And when you stop being attached to who you think you are, you stop needing to control how others see you. Their opinions become weather, their praise becomes wind, their judgment becomes passing noise. None of it touches the space that simply sees. So much of human pain comes from the craving to be seen a certain way, the fear of being misunderstood, the panic of being wrong. But all of that fades when the center of the storm disappears, when the one who was gripping so hard realizes there was nothing to protect. There's a freedom in disappearing, not vanishing from life, but from the weight of identity. You're still here, still alive, still acting, loving, moving, choosing. But it's not about defending a self anymore. It's about dancing with the moment. Control starts to fall away. Because the one who needed to be in control, the fixed ego, the tight identity, the imagined center, was never real. Just a thought, just a pattern, just a story passed down by fear and habit. And the story was heavy. I am this. I must be that. They must see me a certain way. I can't fail. I can't be weak. I must always stay in control. That voice ruled you until you started seeing through it. Now you see there's no solid I to suffer. Just conditions, just sensations, just causes and effects, just flow. When joy comes, it doesn't mean you are good. When sadness comes, it doesn't mean you are failing. It's just what's here, just the weather of now. No need to add labels. No need to say, this is who I am. Just notice, breathe, let it pass. This is not easy at first. The mind wants something solid to hold on to. But solidity is not where peace lives. It lives in the letting go, in the resting back, in the brave act of not grasping anything, not even yourself. The less self you cling to, the more freedom you feel. Because now, you don't need to control everything around you. You don't need to fix everyone's view of you. You don't need to chase success to prove your value. You just live, fully, honestly, softly. Letting go of the self doesn't make you less. It makes you limitless. Because now, you can be anything, flow in any direction, adapt to any change. You don't break when your identity shifts. You don't panic when your image fades. Because you know that was never you to begin with. You're not here to control the world. You're here to wake up inside it. You're not here to defend a role. You're here to dissolve into presence. And presence doesn't need a name. It just, island always, already, enough. When the illusion of self begins to dissolve, something else begins to collapse with it, the craving to feel permanent, stable, unchanging. Because once there's no fixed you to defend, there's also no ground that needs to hold still forever. But the mind still reaches, it looks for something to anchor to. It says, if I'm not who I thought I was, then let me find safety in something else, in money, in routine, in relationships, in reputation, in certainty. And that grasping becomes the next prison. Because when life doesn't give you that stability, and it never does, you feel threatened all over again. So now the problem isn't just control, it's safety. But what if the constant search for safety is what's keeping you from peace? There's a parable in the Lotus Sutra where a man owns a vast house. It's old, beautiful, and falling apart. One day, a fire breaks out. The house is engulfed, but his children are inside playing, unaware of the danger. He calls to them. They don't listen, so he changes his approach. He promises them toys, carts, treasures if they'll just come outside. And when they finally run out, they realize he saved their lives. But not because of toys, because they left a burning house. The burning house is life when it's lived under the illusion that anything here is secure. The job, the status, the family structure, the health, the plan. It's all beautiful, but it's also fragile. And the tragedy is not that it changes. The tragedy is that you thought it never would. You built your comfort inside a structure that was already on fire. The desire for security is not the same as the experience of peace. One is based on conditions, the other is based on awareness. You chase security when you think something outside you can finally make you feel safe. But safety doesn't come from locking the door or stacking up savings or controlling people. It comes from knowing that even if everything falls apart, you'll still be okay. You try to create permanent things in an impermanent world and then suffer when they fade. But it's not just the fading that hurts, it's your belief that they wouldn't, that this love would always last, that this season would stay, that this body wouldn't age. And so when the fire comes through loss, through change, through truth, it feels like a betrayal. But it was never a betrayal. It was a reminder. The fire is not the enemy. The clinging island, when you build your life around the need to be safe, you begin avoiding anything that could stretch you. You stop risking. You stop evolving. You stay in jobs that numb you. You stay in relationships that shrink you. You repeat the same habits, not because they serve you, but because they're familiar. You sit in the burning house because at least you know where the furniture island. And then you ask why you feel stuck, why you feel tired, why you're anxious. The answer isn't out there. It's inside the place you're refusing to leave. It's in the comfort zone that's turned into a trap. Buddhist practice doesn't ask you to live in fear. It asks you to stop mistaking comfort for safety. The safest people are often the most uncomfortable, and the most secure-seeming structures are often the first to collapse. True security can't be built on something that changes. And everything changes, always. So what's the way out? It starts with honesty. The willingness to admit that nothing you cling to will last, that everything you love is temporary, not to make you despair, but to make you awaken. Because only when you stop building on sand do you start looking for real ground. You let go of the belief that anything will stay. You stop demanding permanence from a world made of motion. And in that release, something strange happens. You don't collapse, you expand. You don't grow cold, you grow free. You start to love people without needing to keep them. You start to hold moments without needing to stretch them. You start to live in a way that honors the present, because you're no longer trying to make it permanent. The burning house isn't a threat, it's a teacher. It shows you what's real by removing what isn't. It strips away the illusions so you can see what remains. And what remains is this moment, this breath, this awareness. And the children? The ones who wouldn't leave. That's what the mind becomes when it's addicted to comfort. It plays in distraction, it ignores the smoke, it clings to toys while the walls collapse. And the only way to save it is through wisdom, through compassion, through a call that wakes it up. That's what you're hearing now. This isn't about becoming reckless. It's about no longer being ruled by fear. You still plan, still save, still care, but you don't live as if those things will protect you from impermanence. You act with clarity, not delusion. You prepare, not because you fear the fire, but because you understand the nature of the house. The desire for security is a craving. And like all cravings, it leads to suffering when it goes unmet, which it always does. No amount of money can buy permanence. No relationship can offer immunity to grief. No achievement can protect you from change. And yet, once you accept that, you become fearless, because now you're no longer trying to freeze a world that flows. You're swimming with it. You're walking through fire not to escape it, but to see what in you can't be burned. This is the paradox. The more you try to secure life, the more anxious you become. But the more you let go, the more grounded you feel. Because now you're anchored in something deeper than circumstance. You're anchored in truth. And truth doesn't burn. You can feel everything changing and still not panic. You can watch it all shift and still be kind. You can face the unknown and still walk forward. Because you've stopped building inside the house. You've stepped out into the open. And the open is where awakening begins. Once you stop building your life inside a burning house, something inside begins to shift. The need for guarantees starts to dissolve. You no longer panic every time a wall shakes or a window cracks. You begin to breathe with the truth that everything is temporary, and in that space, a strange kind of calm rises. But here's the next lesson. Even after leaving the house, many still grip tightly to another idea. Detachment must be earned through effort, through force, through a battle with thoughts and emotions. And this belief becomes its own form of control. So now we go further. Not by doing more, but by doing something harder, nothing. This is where true letting go begins. Not by pushing reality away, but by letting it be exactly as it island. Allowing isn't passive, it's powerful in a quiet way. Because the hardest thing for the ego to do is to stop fixing, stop fighting, stop trying to manipulate what already island. You've been taught that peace is something you win by effort. But the deepest peace doesn't come from domination, it comes from spaciousness, from not needing everything to be different, from letting this moment exist without resistance. The mind wants to improve things. Even in spiritual practice, it clings to technique. It tries to engineer awakening. It says, let me detach harder, let me be more mindful, let me let go faster. But what if true release isn't about effort? What if it's about allowing? What if the doorway to peace has no handle, because you were never supposed to force it open? Letting be doesn't mean you endorse everything. It doesn't mean you agree or approve. It simply means you stop creating internal war over what already island. You feel tension in your body, you let it be there. You notice sadness, you let it stay without rushing to solve it. You observe chaos outside, you allow it without feeding it with panic. This doesn't make you weak, it makes you honest. Because reality doesn't need your permission to exist, it's already here. And it doesn't need your constant evaluation to be real. Allowing doesn't mean you give up your voice, your action, your boundaries. It means you take the fight out of your nervous system. You can still respond, but not from urgency, not from reactivity, not from the illusion that peace depends on controlling every detail. The truth is, most of your suffering isn't caused by pain, it's caused by your refusal to let pain exist, your judgment of it, your resistance to it, your demand that it leave before you agree to be whole. Buddhism speaks of the middle way, not indulgence, not suppression, but allowing, observing what arises, watching it peak, letting it pass, nothing clung to, nothing rejected. Just a wide awareness that says, this too, this breath, this thought, this discomfort, this stillness, no fixing, no fighting, no needing anything extra. You think letting go means pushing something away, But often, letting go means relaxing your grip and letting it stay until it's ready to go on its own. That's trust. That's patience. That's the kind of spiritual maturity most never practice, because it doesn't feel dramatic. It's not a grand gesture. It's a quiet act of staying with reality, even when it's uncomfortable. You feel like you're falling behind? Let that thought be there without merging with it. You wake up anxious? Let the tightness in your chest be part of your morning without making it your enemy. You hear something you don't like? Let it land without having to instantly react. Every time you allow something, instead of resisting it, you create space. And space is where peace lives. The mind doesn't want space. It wants control. It wants plans, labels, certainty, closure. But peace isn't born in a perfect plan. It's born in presence. Spacious, grounded, unconditional presence. The kind that watches thoughts without becoming them. That feels feelings without trying to delete them. That sees chaos and stays still. Allowing means surrendering to the fact that life is not a project to be completed. It's a process to be experienced. And not all of it will make sense. Not all of it will feel good. But none of it has to be a problem. It just island. Letting that be true is not defeat. It's wisdom. You've been trained to believe that change only happens through resistance. But the deepest changes often happen through relaxation. When you stop pushing, the system resets itself. When you stop judging, your emotions begin to soften. When you stop correcting, your awareness expands on its own. Letting be doesn't mean you enjoy every moment. It means you stop arguing with the ones you don't enjoy. You allow what hurts, not because you want it to stay, but because fighting it gives it power. You allow what's unknown, not because you like uncertainty, but because denying it won't make the answers arrive any faster. The moment you stop saying, "This shouldn't be happening," a new level of clarity opens, because now you're not caught in the war of preference. You're not adding noise to noise. You're not trying to rip the moment apart just to feel in control. That's what makes allowing so powerful. It doesn't change the moment, it changes you. It doesn't erase the difficulty, it removes the suffering you added on top of it. The same event, now held with less tension. The same emotion, now met with less fear. You start to see that peace is not the absence of chaos. It's the presence of non-resistance. It's not that the storm stops, it's that you stop trying to control the rain. This doesn't mean you stop caring, it means you stop forcing. There's a difference between doing something with awareness and doing something with tightness. One is compassionate, the other is desperate. Letting be is how you stay open without falling apart. It's not easy, because your habits will want to correct everything. Your ego will whisper that allowing is weakness. That surrender means giving up. But that's not true. Letting be is not passive. It's intimate. It takes courage to sit with discomfort. It takes strength to be quiet inside when everything outside screams for reaction. You don't need to fix your fear. Let it be there. You don't need to silence your mind. Let it move. You don't need to rush toward peace. Peace comes when you make room for whatever's here. The more you allow, the less you panic. You see pain as passing, not permanent. You notice thoughts but don't get pulled into their gravity. You stop trying to escape your life, and you begin to enter it moment by moment, breath by breath. This kind of letting go isn't loud, it doesn't announce itself, but it's powerful. Because the moment you stop resisting, your awareness becomes vast. You start seeing things as they are, not through filters of judgment, but through the lens of clarity. You can hold heartbreak without it defining you. You can walk through loss without collapsing into bitterness. You can be present in pain without it becoming your identity. All because you learned how to let it be. That's what real presence means. It's not being perfectly calm. It's being wide enough to include whatever comes. It's having room in you for the mess and the miracle. It's no longer needing life to fit your script in order to feel safe. Every time you soften instead of react, you reclaim power. Every time you pause instead of fix, you reclaim energy. Every time you allow instead of judge, you reclaim peace. Letting be is how you step out of the illusion of control and into the reality of freedom. Not by changing the world, but by no longer needing to. What you allow, you disarm. What you embrace, you release. What you hold gently eventually passes. So stop trying to force your way to peace. Let life be what it island. Let the moment arrive without rewriting it. Let your heart stay open, even when it hurts. Let it all move through, and let yourself be free. Letting things be doesn't mean you're letting everything happen without care. It doesn't mean walking away from effort or surrendering into helplessness. You're not floating through life ignoring consequences. You're just no longer feeding your nervous system with the illusion that everything depends on your grip. But once you allow what is, a new challenge appears. How do you take responsibility for your life without falling back into control? How do you act with integrity without obsessing over the outcome? That's where the misunderstanding of karma begins, and that's where it must be corrected. Karma is one of the most misused and misunderstood words in spiritual language. People turn it into a weapon, a scoreboard, or a fear-based motivator. You hear it all the time. This is happening because of karma. He'll get his karma. I must have bad karma. But karma is not punishment. It's not about fear, and it's definitely not about control. It's about cause and effect, about understanding that actions have consequences, not always immediate, not always visible, but always woven into the larger field of life. Karma doesn't mean you control what happens. It means you influence the quality of your experience through intention, thought, and behavior. But here's the catch. Karma is not a vending machine. You don't insert goodness and get exactly what you asked for. The obsession with perfect results is not karma. That's ego dressed up in spiritual robes. The Buddha didn't teach karma to make people anxious about their fate. He taught it to help people take mindful responsibility without becoming trapped in obsession. What matters is not your attempt to guarantee an outcome. What matters is the clarity and presence you bring to your action. You can be kind without needing people to be kind back. You can work hard without needing a specific reward. You can speak truth without controlling how others hear it. That's the heart of right action, not manipulating results, but aligning your choices with integrity and wisdom. Karma teaches that everything you do leaves a trace not in a book in the sky, but in your mind, in your body, in your heart. When you act with greed, it grows. When you act with compassion, that grows too. But this is not about superstition. It's about pattern, habit, the internal consequences of your mental and emotional direction. You're planting seeds with every choice, but you don't get to control when they sprout, how they grow, or what the weather does to them. That part isn't yours. And the more you try to control it, the more frustration you'll feel. You'll start thinking life is unfair. You'll start questioning your worth. You'll confuse temporary circumstances with eternal punishment. And that's not Buddhism. That's control disguised as spirituality. The mature approach to karma is this: focus on what's yours. Let go of what isn't. You're responsible for your input, not the output. You're accountable for your energy, not other people's reactions. You steer the intention, not the outcome. This approach breaks the chain of anxiety, because most of your mental exhaustion comes from replaying your efforts and demanding they lead to specific results. You overthink every conversation. You fear your choices. You try to predict and perfect your impact. But karma isn't here to make you scared. It's here to make you conscious. Act well and let go. That's not avoidance. That's wisdom. Because when you stop trying to control how the world responds to your actions, You stop living like a puppet. You stop chasing the applause. You stop fearing the silence. You stop bargaining with the universe. And when karma is seen clearly, it stops being a scoreboard and becomes a compass. Not something you check to see who's winning, but something that helps you orient toward truth, clarity, and alignment regardless of how messy the world is around you. When you grasp for results, you create tightness. Even good actions become transactions. You meditate to get peace. You donate to get credit. You help others to feel superior. You pretend to be selfless, but deep down, you're keeping score. And that scorekeeping creates inner pressure. Because now, if life doesn't reward you on time, you feel cheated. You think you failed. You wonder why it's not working. But karma was never a game of short-term wins. Karma doesn't promise control. It promises coherence. Your actions shape your inner landscape, not because someone's watching, but because your choices change your mind. Your intentions shape your perception. Your repeated thoughts create grooves that become your default reactions. Karma is the architecture of your own mental home. So yes, you still have power, but it's a different kind of power. Not over others, not over fate, but over how you move through this life. And that power is more than enough. It lets you shift your identity from victim to participant, from blamer to builder, from grasping to giving. You stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "How am I meeting this moment?" This shift matters, because when things go wrong, your mind will reach for certainty. It will want someone to blame. Often that someone is you. You'll start using karma as a weapon. I must have done something wrong. Maybe I deserved this. But that's not wisdom, that's shame. And shame has nothing to do with awakening. Karma doesn't shame you. It guides you. It reflects your patterns, not your worth. It shows you how your past choices ripple into the present, not to punish you, but to help you see the link between cause and effect more clearly. And once you see that, you become free not from life, but from confusion. You stop expecting fairness in the short term. You stop demanding guarantees. You stop using spiritual effort as a tool to fix everything. Instead, you act because it's right. You choose presence because it brings clarity. You tell the truth because it clears the air, not because it wins you anything. You let the river of results flow. You place your oar in the water and row with care, but you don't control the current. You shape your karma with mindfulness, not fear. And yes, some people will seem to act selfishly and still succeed. Some will lie and still be loved. Some will harm and still receive applause. That's not your business. You don't see their inner landscape. You don't feel the cost of their habits. You don't know what storms they sleep with. And even if you did, it wouldn't help, because karma isn't about justice in your eyes. It's about inner alignment over time. Your peace doesn't need everyone else's karma to play out on your timeline. It only needs you to meet your life with full awareness, steady presence, and honest care. You stop thinking of karma as a cosmic vending machine and start seeing it as a path of integrity. You're not walking it to get something. You're walking it because it's the only road that doesn't cost your soul. When you understand this, your whole relationship with effort changes. You work hard, but without desperation. You love deeply, but without demand. You speak truth, but without clinging to how it lands. This doesn't mean you don't feel. You'll still have hopes. You'll still care. But you're not building your sanity around outcomes anymore. You're building your peace around process, around presence, around how you show up. That's the real fruit of karma. Not guarantees, but groundedness. Not certainty, but clarity. Not perfection, but participation. And this clarity protects you, because when things fall apart, you won't spiral into confusion. You'll say, "This too is part of the flow. Let me meet it with presence. Let me respond with grace." Let me plant seeds again. You become patient with life. You stop needing every chapter to end the way you planned. You stop holding your actions hostage to results. You stop measuring your worth by the timeline of reward. And strangely, this makes you more consistent, not less. Because now you're not acting based on mood. You're acting based on alignment. Not because of fear, but because it's who you are. You are no longer waiting for life to clap for you. You are clapping for life every time you choose intention over impulse, compassion over control, presence over panic. You are not karma's victim. You are its sculptor. So don't grasp, just plant, water, pause, and let go. When you stop clinging to karmic outcomes, something deeper shifts. You stop performing for results and start living from alignment. You take responsibility without dragging around the weight of obsession. But even when intention is pure, even when your actions are wise, pain still finds a way in. Life still delivers loss, disappointment, and unexpected turns. And the mind, trained to control and correct, tries to resist what's already happened. It holds on to the moment, replays it, resists it, and that resistance becomes the second wound. The Buddha called this the second arrow, not the pain itself, but your reaction to it. The first arrow is life, the second is your fight with it. Pain by itself is sharp, but simple. Something breaks, someone leaves, a plan fails, a body aches. That's the first arrow. It lands quickly and without warning. But the suffering that follows, that's not the pain anymore. That's the mental storm that says, this shouldn't have happened. I should have known better. This always happens to me. Why can't I get it right? The first arrow is unavoidable. The second is optional. You don't choose what happens, but you can choose how long you bleed. Most people live in the second arrow. They think it's normal to rehearse regret 100 times, to carry old wounds like they're proof of failure. They think reliving the moment will give them back control. But it doesn't. It tightens the knot. It adds layers of judgment on top of what was already hard. And now, the original pain becomes buried under stories, blame, and fear. You get hurt. That's real. But then the mind takes over. It builds a narrative. I'm not enough. They always do this. This proves I'm unlovable. And now, you're not just feeling pain, you're wearing it as identity. That's the second arrow. The problem isn't that you feel. The problem is that you personalize. You take an event and turn it into evidence. You take a moment and turn it into a verdict. And in doing so, you suffer long after the arrow has passed. Buddhist practice doesn't promise you a painless life. It shows you how to meet pain without multiplying it. It teaches you to feel fully without identifying with the feeling. It shows you how to make space around the arrow instead of pushing it deeper. You're allowed to hurt. You're allowed to cry. You're allowed to ache. But you're not required to narrate your pain into a story of failure. You're not obligated to turn loss into identity. You're not meant to live inside the wound. When something goes wrong, the ego tries to fix the past by obsessing over it. It replays the moment, rewrites the dialogue, rehearses better decisions, but none of that helps. Because the moment is gone. It already happened. And the second arrow doesn't heal it, just keeps the pain alive. You don't have to forget. But you do have to stop resisting, because resistance doesn't remove the hurt, it traps it. It presses it against your nervous system and forces you to relive it every time your mind gets quiet. Letting go of the second arrow means learning how to sit with what is, without punishing yourself for it. You don't ask, why did this happen to me? You ask, can I let this hurt without turning it into a lifelong scar? Because pain is part of being alive, but suffering is the refusal to feel it without judgment. You've been taught to be strong by pushing pain away, but real strength comes from allowing it without collapse, from letting the pain speak without letting it take over your voice, from facing it without adding the extra weight of blame, shame, and rumination. The second arrow disguises itself as logic. It sounds like problem-solving. It pretends it's helping, but really, it's fear. It's your mind scrambling for certainty in a world that doesn't give any. It's your ego trying to rewind the tape and control what's already been written. The first arrow may be out of your hands, but the second one, that's yours to drop. You start by noticing it. You pause when the story begins. You feel the original pain, and you stop the spiral that follows. You stop turning it into identity. You stop comparing it to other people's journeys. You stop stacking it against your past. You say, yes, this hurts, and that's okay, but I don't need to carry it longer than I have to. You stop feeding the fire with thoughts. You give yourself space instead, breath instead, compassion instead. You allow the pain to move without clinging to it, without weaponizing it, without building a shrine around it. And with time, something beautiful happens. The pain passes, not because you forced it, but because you didn't trap it. Suffering stays when it's resisted. But when you let pain be pain, it becomes a wave. It rises, it crests, it falls, and you remain. You don't need to explain the arrow. You don't need to understand why it came. You don't need to turn it into a lesson right away. You just need to stop making it worse by turning it into a punishment. Even grief changes when you stop resisting it. Even heartbreak becomes softer when you stop narrating it. Even mistakes feel lighter when you stop dragging them through every day that follows. You're not erasing the past. You're releasing your grip on it. And that's not weakness. That's wisdom. Letting go of the second arrow is not the same as forgetting. It's choosing not to bleed for something twice. It's choosing to protect your energy instead of burning it in mental fights with something that's already done. When a wound is fresh, it needs presence, not judgment, not control. Just breath, just stillness, just kindness. And when the second arrow shows up, and it will, you don't fight it. You just notice. And in that noticing, you soften. And in that softening, you heal. Healing doesn't happen when the pain is gone. It happens when the war with the pain ends. The arrow came. It landed. It hurt. That's real. But you can stop pulling it out and stabbing yourself with it over and over. Let it be what it was. Let it teach what it teaches. Let it pass when it's ready. You're allowed to move forward, even if it still aches, even if it's not fair, even if no one apologized. You're allowed to rest. You're allowed to stop fighting what already happened. You're allowed to live without the second arrow. Letting go of the second arrow doesn't mean you forget the pain. It means you stop making it personal. You stop carrying it like it's your identity. You stop wrapping every bruise in a story about who you are. And as that layer falls away, a deeper question rises. If you're not the one who needs to relive the past, if you're not the one being punished by your pain, then who exactly is this you that's trying to steer everything? Who is the one feeling in control or out of control? The more you look for that solid center, the more it slips through your fingers. And that's not a failure. That's the next lesson. It's time to meet the illusion of the charioteer. In the Buddhist text Milinda Panya, there's a dialogue between King Milinda and the monk Nagasena. The king asks, "Who are you? What is Nagasena?" And Nagasena replies with a question of his own. What is a chariot? Is it the wheels, the axle, the seat, the yoke, the reins, or is it just the name given to a collection of parts? If the parts are removed one by one, where does the chariot go? The same is true for the self. You're taught to think there's someone at the center, driving the body, managing the emotions, guiding the thoughts. A little charioteer behind your eyes, holding the reins. But the more you look, the more you realize there's no driver, just movement, just sensation, just a collection of parts, constantly shifting. The chariot metaphor doesn't deny your experience. It just shows you that what you call you is not a single separate thing. It's a process, a temporary coordination, a dance of causes and conditions. Thoughts arise, but not from a thinker. Emotions move, but not from a controller. Choices happen, but not from an isolated self. This can feel unsettling at first, the idea that there's no one in charge, but that discomfort comes from the mind's addiction to identity. It wants to be someone, it wants to be a captain, but Buddhist wisdom reveals that the sense of I is just a bundle of habits, a stream of conditioning, not a fixed thing, but a story. You don't control your heartbeat, you don't choose your thoughts, you don't decide your memories. You react, you respond, you move, but all of it happens in a field of interdependence. And the deeper you look, the less you find a single point of origin. There's no true owner, just unfolding. This doesn't make life meaningless. It makes it lighter. Because if there's no central self to carry, there's no central self to protect, no image to defend, no ego to polish. Just experience fluid, temporary, real. The charioteer illusion is what makes you suffer when life breaks your plans. You feel like you've lost control. But how could you lose something you never had? There was never a single you at the controls. There were only shifting responses to shifting conditions. When you think you're the driver, every misstep becomes a personal failure. Every mistake becomes shame. Every detour becomes fear. But when you understand you're the chariot, not the driver, you stop blaming yourself for every turn. You start riding with awareness, not clinging. The body, the feelings, the perceptions, the mental formations, the consciousness, these are the aggregates. They make up what we call the person. But none of them, alone or together, form a fixed self. Just like wheels, axles and reins don't make a true chariot. It's all designation, useful for conversation, dangerous when believed as reality. This shifts how you relate to your experience. When anger arises, you no longer say, "I am angry." You say, "Anger is present." When fear arises, it's not, "I am afraid," but fear is happening. There's distance, clarity, a gentle gap between stimulus and self. And in that gap, there's freedom. You're not dissolving into nothing. You're discovering that you were never a thing to begin with. You're not the driver. You're the whole process. And that process doesn't need to be controlled, it needs to be witnessed. This is where peace begins. Not in grasping harder, not in fixing the narrative, but in letting the story soften, letting identity become transparent, letting the reins fall away and realizing the horses are running without a master and always have been. Most of the pressure you carry is the result of believing you're supposed to be someone, that you're supposed to always know, always lead, always decide with full control. But once you see that the charioteer is a construction, not a fact, the pressure breaks open. You can still act, but now without attachment. You can still speak, but now without defensiveness. You stop trying to become someone. You start showing up as presence. Without a fixed driver, you stop fearing mistakes. They're not threats to your identity. They're just part of movement. You stop fearing judgment. It's not about you. It's about projections, preferences, perspectives. You stop fearing uncertainty, because the one who needed guarantees never really existed, and yet your life becomes more honest. You're not hiding behind roles. You're not obsessed with status. You're not measuring your worth by how well the chariot performs. You're aware that all of it, every experience, is part of a passing show. Even your name is just a label, useful but not ultimate. The moment you think, "I am this," suffering begins. Because now, anything that threatens that idea feels dangerous. But if there's no fixed I, there's nothing to defend. You're free to evolve, free to adapt, free to be. You don't disappear. You become clear. You start living from awareness, not identity. And awareness doesn't grasp, it doesn't judge, it doesn't perform, it sees. This is what the Buddha pointed to, not a self that controls, but a flow that unfolds. Not a driver at the wheel, but a process in motion. And the more deeply you accept that, the more softly you begin to live. You stop demanding consistency from yourself. You allow contradictions, moods, changes. You stop punishing yourself for not being the person you used to be. Because now, you know you never were. Even your mistakes become easier to face. Because they're not a stain on a permanent self. They're just patterns to be understood, conditions to be studied, habits to be shifted. No shame, just learning. This kind of clarity doesn't remove emotion. It transforms your relationship to it. You still feel, but you no longer fuse with every feeling. You still experience thought, but you no longer believe every thought. You stop building an identity out of impermanent parts. And when you stop being the charioteer, life feels lighter, because you're no longer carrying the impossible task of managing every outcome, proving every worth, securing every opinion. You're not less human. You're more present, not steering, but sensing, not driving, but dancing, not possessing, but participating. And somehow, from that place, you make fewer harmful choices. Because your actions don't come from ego, they come from clarity, from care, from the realization that you're not a fixed self, you're part of a vast field of interconnection. So you act with kindness, speak with intention, move with humility. Not to prove who you are, but because you no longer need to. The chariot still moves, but it moves freely, lightly, without the illusion of a driver weighing it down. You were never the one in control. You were always the one aware. And now you know. And once the illusion of the charioteer falls away, there's nothing left to manipulate, no one left to demand perfection from. Just breath, just unfolding. And yet, even here, something sneaky creeps in. The desire for stillness, the grasping for peace. Not for identity this time, but for clarity, for control over the mind's weather. The obsession with understanding everything, with having a clear head, a quiet soul, a perfect explanation. But that's just another trick, another costume for the same craving. And it's time now to see it for what it is: clouds in the mind. There's a certain kind of suffering that hides behind the pursuit of peace. It doesn't look aggressive, it doesn't shout, but it whispers every time thought gets messy, every time emotion rises like fog, every time the inner sky darkens. It says, "This shouldn't be happening. You're supposed to be calm. You've failed." And so, another chase begins. The chase for clarity, the fantasy that one day the mind will be forever still, that every thought will make sense, that every doubt will dissolve. But true wisdom doesn't come from silencing the storm. It comes from letting the storm be a storm. The mind, like the sky, was never meant to be cloudless. Thoughts drift, emotions swirl, ideas take shape and dissolve. That's not a problem. That's nature. Suffering begins when this movement is resisted, when thoughts are treated like threats, when restlessness is seen as wrong. But a sky without clouds is just another form of craving. It becomes an ideal, a spiritual performance, something to achieve. And in that achievement mindset, freedom is lost. Peace isn't the absence of mental weather. It's the willingness to let clouds come and go. Thoughts don't have to be perfect. They don't even have to be pleasant. They just have to be seen, with awareness, with space, with no agenda to fix them. A cloudy mind is not a broken mind. It's a human mind. What creates tension is not the cloud, but the belief that the cloud should not exist. The moment that judgment softens, the mind stops fighting itself. Many chase clarity like a destination. They think, once I figure this out, then I'll feel better. But that line never ends. Solve one thought, 10 more appear. Dismiss one fear, another takes its place. The mind isn't a puzzle to be completed, it's a landscape to be traveled. And not every path has to lead somewhere. Some just need to be walked. Thoughts come in waves, not timelines. Emotions erupt without warning. And still, most people believe there's something wrong with this. That a wise person should always be calm, always know, always smile in stillness. But stillness isn't passive. Stillness is the ability to watch the chaos without needing to escape it. There's a quiet violence in needing to be clear. It turns thought into a battlefield. It turns confusion into shame. But what if confusion is part of clarity? What if uncertainty is not a detour but a door? What if the fog is sacred too? The Buddha didn't promise an end to thought. He didn't say the mind would stop. He taught how to stop clinging to the mind, how to stop being at war with what arises. That's where true clarity lives. Not in controlling the weather, but in no longer being afraid of the rain. Thoughts are not enemies, they are echoes. They are fragments of perception, memory, habit. They're not trying to hurt you. They're not proof of failure. They're clouds shifting, dissolving, returning, and leaving. If you let them pass, they will. If you chase them, they multiply. Even spiritual seeking can become a trap. The desire to be still can be louder than the stillness itself. People meditate hoping for silence, and when noise appears, they feel they've lost. But silence isn't the absence of sound, it's the space that allows all sound. Clarity isn't an empty sky, it's the sky that holds every cloud. You don't have to chase your way into peace. You don't have to purify the mind like a spotless floor. You just have to stop treating clouds like stains. Stop measuring your worth by your clarity. A brilliant mind can be messy. A wise heart can be heavy. A peaceful person can feel overwhelmed. None of these are contradictions. You're not failing when the mind is busy. You're not regressing when doubt appears. You're just human, fully, fiercely, beautifully human. The goal isn't to stop thinking. The goal is to stop believing that every thought is urgent. Craving clarity turns meditation into performance. It turns rest into effort. It turns awareness into judgment. But true insight is quiet. It does not insist. It does not conquer. It waits. And it welcomes. Let the mind wander. Let it loop. Let it speak its fears. You don't have to fix it. You don't have to silence it. Just don't follow it. Don't chase. Don't run. Let it pass like wind across a lake ripples, not ruin. Sometimes peace means letting it be noisy. Sometimes clarity means standing in the fog. Sometimes the most enlightened choice is to stop trying to be enlightened. You can sit with confusion. You can hold space for not knowing. You can allow contradiction. That is strength. That is maturity. That is freedom. If you stop chasing clouds, they lose their power. If you stop needing the mind to be silent, it calms itself. Not always, not instantly, but naturally, like dust settling after the breeze lets go. You were never meant to live in a clear sky. You were meant to live in the whole sky, the one that rains, that storms, that glows, that shifts, and through all of it remains wide and open and alive. Some thoughts will return, some feelings will linger, but none of them define you. They are weather patterns, not truths. You don't need to argue with the clouds. You just need to recognize the sky. You can still act with purpose, still speak with care, still show up fully, but not because the mind is empty, because you no longer need it to be. You stop waiting for the perfect mood to begin. You stop needing the storm to pass before you rest. You stop hoping the world gets quiet so you can feel okay. You start being okay, even when it's not quiet. This is the end of spiritual striving, not the end of effort, but the end of self-aggression. You work with the mind, not against it. You sit with it, not above it. You begin to see that true clarity is not crystal, it is fluid. Not sharp, it is soft. Not blinding, it is warm. And eventually, you stop asking for a better moment. You stop searching for a better version of yourself. You just return to now, as it island cloudy, open, alive, because that is enough, and you are enough, even with the clouds, especially with the clouds. And once the clouds are allowed to drift freely across the sky of the mind, a deeper realization surfaces. Perhaps the pursuit itself was the final illusion. Not just the chase for peace, but the chase for something bigger, something brighter, enlightenment, liberation, the end of all suffering. Even this, in its most sacred form, can harden into a hidden form of clinging. The heart whispers, just one more insight, just one more breakthrough, and then I'll be complete. But what if that too must be released? What if the final freedom isn't found at the mountaintop, but in the quiet descent back to the market square, empty-handed and whole? That's the silent wisdom of the ox-herding pictures. The ox-herding pictures are 10 ancient Zen illustrations that trace the path of spiritual awakening. They begin with a seeker searching for the ox symbol of the true self, or the awakened mind, and end not with some glowing transcendence, but with the seeker returning to ordinary life, not as a teacher, not as a master, but as no one in particular, just a person barefoot in the mud, smiling among the people. The first pictures are about effort, the struggle, the search, the restless journey of trying to find what was never lost. A man looking for the ox he's never really been apart from, and so he looks in books, in rituals, in concepts, in silence, in teachers. And every glimpse of the ox feels like a success. Every step feels like progress. But this illusion of progress, this feeling of getting closer to some final destination, becomes its own cage. The ox is not a place to arrive. It's the breath in this moment. It's the awareness noticing the breath. It's the person breathing. In the middle of the sequence, the ox is caught. It's tamed. The seeker feels victorious. But even here, attachment is hiding. Now, it's attachment to control, to having grasped some spiritual insight, to having arrived somewhere. The ox is no longer running wild, but now there's pride, subtle, spiritualized, a quiet ego in robes, and then the ox disappears. In the later pictures, there's no more ox, no more seeking, no more seeker, just emptiness. And that emptiness isn't dark, it's luminous, spacious, unburdened. But even that isn't the end. The last image shows the seeker returning to the world, shopping at the market, laughing with strangers, carrying a wine jug, living without needing to appear wise. That is the deepest teaching. The journey doesn't end with renunciation, it ends with return. Not return as the same person, but return as one who needs nothing, proves nothing, clings to nothing. Many walk the path trying to escape the world. They think awakening means retreat, silence, detachment, floating above the noise. But true awakening moves toward life, not away from it. It doesn't escape the marketplace. It blends into it. It meets it without armor. The early stages of seeking are full of striving. People set spiritual goals. They want to reach the end of suffering. They want to master the mind. They want to dissolve the ego. And all of it sounds noble. But it's still desire. It's still pressure. It's still chasing. Even the desire to awaken can become a burden. When will I finally get it? How do I maintain my state? Why do I keep falling back? These questions create cycles. Cycles of measuring, of comparing, of doubting. But the path doesn't move in a line. It loops. It disappears. It turns into something else. And that's not failure. That's the design. In the ox-herding pictures, nothing is rejected. The ox is not bad, the struggle is not bad, the search is not wrong, but clinging to any part of the journey, even to awakening itself, becomes a trap. True insight is not obsessed with permanence, it's content with vanishing. Like the ox, like the seeker, like the need to seek. One day the whole project falls apart. And in that falling apart, there's relief, there's laughter, there's a soft return to the ordinary. The seeker who returns to the marketplace is not pretending to be humble. They have forgotten to be anything. They aren't trying to help others. Their presence just helps. They don't hold teachings. Their life becomes the teaching. And they don't walk around telling people they're enlightened. They're too busy helping someone pick out turnips or finding a missing goat. Many chase spiritual highs, peak experiences, moments of oneness, states of bliss. But those pass. They have to. And when they do, people panic. They think they've lost their way. But what's lost is the fantasy that awakening was a state. What remains is something simpler, more durable, less exciting, a kind of open-hearted ordinariness. The goal is not to stay above suffering. It's to meet suffering without resistance, to walk through the world without armor, to return to the market without forgetting the silence within, not as someone special, not as someone awakened, but as someone real. Letting go of the need to reach enlightenment is not the same as giving up. It's trusting that there's nothing to reach, nothing missing, no self to fix, no final insight that will make everything perfect. Just this moment, and then this one. In Zen, it's said that before awakening, mountains are mountains. During awakening, mountains become rivers. But after awakening, mountains are mountains again. The difference is the clinging is gone, the struggle is gone, the ideas about what it all means gone. The seeker doesn't vanish, the struggle doesn't vanish, but the compulsion to fix, to achieve, to arrive that softens, that falls off, that dies a quiet death. And what's left is life. Simple, messy, honest, lived, without pretending to be free from it. You're allowed to want peace, to want awakening, but don't turn that desire into a chain. Don't make it another weight to carry. The ox-herding pictures aren't instructions, they're reminders that the journey is not about becoming someone, it's about unbecoming everything that was never needed. And when you finally stop trying to be awake, that's when the deepest peace slips in, not as a dramatic event, but as a quiet return. A return to walking barefoot, to doing the dishes, to talking with strangers without needing to impress. A return to life, just as it island. There is no spiritual finish line, no final proof that you've made it. The ego wants that, but the heart doesn't need it. The heart just wants to be here, present, open, real. So if you're tired of striving, let that tiredness be your teacher. Let the path fall apart. Let the ox go. Let the self dissolve, and then return. Not to preach, not to teach, just to live. To love, to serve, quietly, gently, with nothing left to prove. This is the last surrender. Letting go of even the idea of letting go. Dropping even the goal of dropping goals. Laughing at the whole game while still playing it with care. And as you walk back into the world, you may find something unexpected. Not a grand enlightenment, not a final answer, but a simple joy. A quiet enoughness. The ox is gone, the seeker is gone. And yet here you are alive, walking, smiling, being, whole, with nothing more to reach for. And so, after returning to the world empty-handed, not seeking enlightenment, not clinging to insight, not proving anything to anyone, something subtle begins to shift. There's no pressure to perform wisdom, no race to demonstrate growth. But in that quiet, something more surprising happens. Life begins to flow in ways the mind never planned for. The less one holds on to expectations, the more space opens up for the kind of moments that defy logic, timing, and control. This is where the lesson of the empty cup begins, not as a metaphor, but as a way of being. A famous Zen story tells of a student visiting a master. The student comes full of knowledge, full of questions, full of eager conclusions. The master pours tea into the student's cup, but keeps pouring until it overflows. The student cries out, "It's full, no more will go in." The master replies, "Exactly. You are like this cup, so full of your own opinions and certainties, there is no space for anything new." The lesson isn't just about humility, it's about making room. Letting go of what fills the mind so that life can offer something unexpected. Most people don't realize how many expectations they carry. About how a day should go, about how others should behave, about how success should look. Even spiritual growth becomes infected with silent assumptions. There's a belief that certain practices should lead to certain results, that meditation should bring peace, that healing should follow a clean timeline, that awakening should feel transcendent. But none of this is guaranteed, and none of it is needed for life to be deeply meaningful. An empty cup doesn't mean having nothing, it means being open to anything, and that's rare. The ego clings to plans, the mind searches for guarantees, the heart aches for what it thinks it deserves. But grace, true, surprising, soul-shifting grace, doesn't enter where there's no room. It arrives in the gaps, the spaces where the mind pauses, the moments where expectation is dropped like a heavy stone. Letting go of expectation doesn't mean being passive, it means being present, noticing what's here instead of what was supposed to be. Most disappointment isn't caused by life, it's caused by the story of what life was supposed to be. And the more that story is clutched, the harder it becomes to see what beauty is already unfolding. Think of all the times life surprised you, a sudden conversation that changed everything, a stranger's kindness that shifted your mood, an opportunity that came only after a door slammed shut. None of it could have been predicted, none of it could have been forced. And yet, it came. It came when there was room. When the mind is full of fear, there's no space to recognize joy. When it's full of past hurt, there's no space to feel what's blooming now. When it's packed with mental noise, worries, fantasies, judgments, there's no space for stillness to breathe. The cup is full, but it's not nourishing. It's overflowing with habits, beliefs, and patterns that no longer serve. The empty cup is not about becoming blank, it's about becoming receptive. In the same way, a musician pauses between notes, or a painter leaves blank space to make the subject breathe, life also requires room. But society worships fullness, full schedules, full resumes, full shopping carts. And so people rarely feel the emptiness that allows something deeper to enter. In Buddhist teachings, shunyata, or emptiness, doesn't mean void or absence. It means openness, interdependence, freedom from fixed identity. An empty cup can hold tea, water, wine, or nothing at all. And in that flexibility lies its beauty. The moment you say, "Only this should happen," you close the door to the thousands of other things that could. Letting go of expectation is also an act of trust. Trust that the unknown is not the enemy, that not knowing what comes next doesn't mean failure, that silence doesn't mean stagnation. It's trusting that sometimes not getting what was wanted is the greatest mercy, and that the best things often come sideways, quietly, through doors not even seen. People often say, "Be realistic." But what they mean is, cling to your predictions. Don't get disappointed. Yet the truly realistic person knows life is anything but predictable. Things shift. People evolve. Seasons turn. A plan today may be irrelevant tomorrow. So to live fully is not to plan better, it's to hold plans lightly and meet the moment as it island. There's a peace that comes from not needing things to unfold a certain way. It doesn't mean giving up. It means showing up with curiosity instead of control. When there's space in the mind, even challenges are received differently. They're not interruptions, they're invitations. To see more clearly, to soften, to begin again. The heart, too, has a cup, and it fills quickly with stories. Stories of betrayal, of regret, of loss. But when those stories are held too tightly, the heart can't feel what's now. It stays locked in a loop. To empty the cup of the heart is to cry without apology, to forgive without forgetting, to feel pain, then release it not because it didn't matter, but because it can't define what's next. Emptying also happens through stillness, not the forced kind, the listening kind, sitting without distraction, walking without rushing, letting silence cleanse the inner clutter. In those moments, the noise of expectation begins to settle and a deeper awareness begins to rise. Sometimes, the mind clings to wisdom like a trophy. I've learned this, I know that. But even wisdom, if not emptied, can harden into pride, into dogma, into walls. The wisest people often say the least, not because they lack insight, but because they're still learning, still letting life teach them, still making space. Letting go of expectations doesn't mean becoming numb, it means becoming alive to what island? A child crying in a supermarket, a storm ruining weekend plans, a friend not calling back. None of it feels like grace, but sometimes, in those very moments, something unplanned opens a deeper breath, a flash of understanding, a softening that wasn't there before. Life rarely gives what's asked for in the form expected, but often it gives something better. Not more glamorous, not more impressive, but more needed, more honest, more real. When the cup is empty, it can receive whatever comes: joy, sorrow, insight, mystery, and it can pour it out again without clinging. True freedom isn't getting everything wanted. It's not needing to know what's next. It's walking into each day with hands open. It's speaking without rehearsing, loving without scripting, living without demanding guarantees. When someone fully lets go of expectation, they don't become passive. They become powerful in a quiet, resilient way. They don't resist life, they respond to it. They don't chase meaning, they create it in every action, no matter how small. The empty cup doesn't mean you have no desires. It means desires no longer dictate your peace. You can want and still release. You can act and still surrender. You can dream and still welcome surprise. Grace, by nature, can't be controlled. It shows up when least expected, and it only enters where there's room. So each time you notice the mind grasping, pause, breathe, loosen your grip, pour out what no longer serves, and stand still for a while. In that space, the unexpected may arrive not as a miracle, but as a gentle shift, a new insight, a quiet joy, a softened heart. The cup is never meant to stay full. It is meant to hold, release, and receive again. That is its gift. That is its nature. That is the quiet art of making space for the unexpected. And just like that, as the cup empties and the soul learns to release its grip on outcomes, a different kind of strength begins to stir. Not the kind made of willpower or declarations, but the kind that bends without breaking. In the quiet space where control is let go, there's something else waiting, something softer, something stronger. The kind of resilience that doesn't resist the storm, but flows with it. The bamboo does not stand tall by being rigid. It survives the wind because it bows. When life collapses unexpectedly, jobs lost, relationships ended, identities questioned, the first instinct is often to cling harder, to hold tighter to titles, roles, routines, and images of who one believes they are. But this rigidity is often what causes the deepest suffering. The tree that refuses to bend in the wind is the one most likely to snap. And so, the wisdom of the bamboo offers a different kind of lesson, one not grounded in force, but in flexibility. In many cultures, bamboo represents strength, but not because it's the hardest plant, because it's the most adaptable. It sways, it yields, it stretches far before ever reaching a breaking point. And in that bending, there's a quiet power, a trust in motion, a wisdom in release. This kind of strength is not celebrated enough. Society praises those who stand firm, who never change their minds, who cling to identity as if it's sacred. But what if the greatest freedom lies not in holding tight, but in letting go? Think of how much suffering is caused by trying to maintain a fixed identity, the need to be seen as successful, even when crumbling inside, the need to play the role of the strong one, even when exhausted, the need to always be right, even when growth means being wrong. Identity becomes a prison, not because it's false, but because it's frozen. And life, by its very nature, is not still. To bend is to recognize that who you are is not a fixed object. It's a process. It's a series of unfoldings. One day the role is teacher, the next it's learner. One season it's caretaker, another it's seeker. When identity is held too tightly, change becomes terrifying. But when flexibility is embraced, change becomes an ally. Flexibility does not mean weakness, it means wisdom. A river carves through mountains not because it is strong, but because it yields, it adapts. It flows around the unmovable. And over time, it changes the very landscape. This is the power of softness. This is the resilience of bending. When pride takes hold, bending feels like defeat. To say, I was wrong, feels like failure. To say, I need help, feels like weakness. But pride is brittle. It cannot bend. It cannot evolve. And so it breaks under pressure. True resilience comes from humility, the kind that allows space for mistakes, for shifts, for growth. Think of a moment in life when everything felt like it was falling apart. The loss of a dream, the betrayal of a friend, the collapse of plans. In those moments, what kept you going wasn't your control. It was your capacity to adapt, to soften where you wanted to harden, to keep moving when standing still felt safer. Flexibility doesn't erase the pain, it simply means the pain doesn't define what comes next. Letting go of rigidity also means letting go of the illusion that everything must make sense right away. The need to find meaning immediately can create more suffering. Sometimes, the lesson isn't visible until much later. And until then, the most resilient thing to do is keep bending, keep listening, keep allowing. In the natural world, flexibility is survival. Animals migrate, trees shed leaves, cells in the body constantly regenerate. Nothing stays fixed. And yet, humans often believe their value lies in consistency, in always being the same. But what if the soul is meant to evolve? What if your very purpose is to be shaped by experience, not defined by it? Letting go of rigidity in roles also frees others. When someone is always expected to be the strong one, they can't breathe. When someone is always expected to be the cheerful one, they can't grieve. When someone is only loved for being useful, they can't rest. Flexibility in identity allows space for the full spectrum of being. Flexibility is also an act of deep listening to yourself, to the moment, to what is actually needed now, not what was needed yesterday. This moment might require stillness. The next might call for boldness. One day, silence heals. Another day, speaking truth does. The flexible soul doesn't resist these shifts, it responds to them. In Buddhist teachings, the middle path is often misunderstood as a compromise. But it is not weakness, it is balance. It is wisdom that doesn't lean too far in any direction, that knows how to center itself, not by rigid discipline, but by gentle correction, like a dancer adjusting mid-step, like bamboo swaying but not falling. In meditation too, this flexibility matters. Some days the mind is loud, other days it's calm. The point is not to force silence, but to meet the mind as it island, to bend with it, not against it, to sit, not to achieve, but to allow. The practice isn't perfection, it's presence. Relationships thrive when flexibility is present. The ability to say, I was wrong, or I've changed my mind, or let's start over. Rigidity demands being right. Flexibility values connection over ego. It lets go of the need to win and chooses to understand instead. Even the body teaches this. Muscles that are never stretched become stiff. Joints that are never moved lose their range. Resilience is not just about strength, it's about fluidity. Emotional, mental, physical, spiritual. To remain open, supple, responsive. And in grief too, flexibility is survival. There is no straight path through loss. Some days, the sorrow feels far away. Other days, it hits like the first hour. To move with that, to bend with the waves, is not weakness, it is the only way to stay afloat. Flexibility also means not needing to define everything. Not every feeling needs a label, not every moment needs a conclusion. Sometimes, the most profound thing one can do is let things be, let them unfold, let them move through and beyond. The bamboo bends because it trusts the storm will pass. It doesn't resist the wind, it dances with it, and when the storm is gone, the bamboo is still standing. Not because it fought harder, but because it surrendered more wisely. That kind of resilience is not dramatic, but it is lasting. There is something beautiful in not always having to be right, in not always knowing the answer, in allowing mystery. The flexible mind makes space for wonder, for surprise, for transformation. The rigid mind, by contrast, only makes room for what already fits. Letting go of pride is perhaps the hardest part. The part that says, I should be beyond this, or this shouldn't affect me anymore. But healing is not linear, and growth is not a checklist. Pride often delays peace. Flexibility invites it back in. To bend is also to forgive, not just others, but oneself. To say, I didn't handle that well, and I can try again. Rigidity punishes, flexibility repairs. It weaves broken threads into new patterns. It finds strength not in being untouched, but in being softened. And at the heart of all this bending is love. A love that doesn't demand perfection, a love that doesn't panic at change, a love that trusts you can be many things over time and still be true, still be worthy, still be whole. The bamboo bends not to hide, but to survive, not to escape, but to endure, not to please, but to protect. And when the storm ends, it rises again, tall, quiet, rooted. That is the quiet strength of flexibility, not louder than pain, but deeper. Not faster than time, but wiser. Let that be enough. Let yourself bend when needed. Let yourself stretch when called. Let yourself flow where life moves, and trust deeply, quietly, that you will not break. And, just like the bamboo that returns upright after the storm, quiet but unshaken, there comes a moment when even the mind's most persistent tempests begin to fade. Not because they've been conquered, but because something deeper has been understood. It's no longer about resisting the force. It's about recognizing the illusion behind it. And this brings us to a moment of great tenderness, one that reveals the heart of the inner struggle not as a fight to win, but as a presence to be understood. It's the final visit of Mara. Mara is not a villain in the way stories often cast shadows. He doesn't carry weapons, doesn't roar through the forest, doesn't trap anyone physically. Instead, Mara whispers the thoughts that feed self-doubt, fear, anger, craving, and despair. He is not outside. He is the voice within that question's worth, that resurrects past wounds, that ignites silent wars under the skin. And yet, in the Buddha's final days, when Mara visits again, something remarkable happens. There's no battle, no banishment, no resistance. There is, instead, an offering of tea. That moment reveals something far more powerful than discipline. It reveals acceptance, and not the passive kind. This acceptance is wise. It sees clearly. It meets the darkest thought without panic. It says, "I see you. You do not control me. You may sit here, but you no longer run the show." This is how the Buddha greets Mara in the end, not with force, not with denial, but with full awareness and compassionate presence. What makes Mara lose his grip is not being defeated, it's being welcomed, being seen without fear, being treated like a guest, not an enemy. That response removes the fuel from the fire. And that's the lesson. Negative thoughts thrive on rejection, on being pushed away, on being feared. They lose power when brought into the light with steady, calm attention. Many live in a constant state of silent combat, waging war against their own minds. Thoughts arise unwanted, intrusive, uncomfortable, and the reaction is immediate. Get rid of it, fight it, suppress it. But that fight becomes the trap. The more resistance, the more attention. The more attention, the more rooted the thought becomes. It's like trying to silence an echo by shouting at it. The story of Mara is a mirror. It reflects the parts of ourselves we label as unworthy, the inner critic, the anger, the craving, the sadness. But labeling them as enemies only feeds their strength. When the Buddha sees Mara, he calls him by name, not in fear, but in recognition. "Ah, Mara," he says gently, "you are here again." This act of naming is not just poetic, it is powerfully disarming. Naming brings consciousness, consciousness brings space, and space interrupts the cycle. Negative thoughts are not proof of failure, they are part of the human experience. What transforms the experience is how they are met. Meeting them with curiosity instead of judgment changes everything. Asking, "Where did this come from?" or "What is this trying to protect?" opens a new path. A path not of control, but of understanding. Letting go of the battle doesn't mean giving up. It means changing the nature of the relationship. Instead of trying to win against the inner voices, the path is about inviting them to speak and listening without being consumed. This isn't easy, especially when those thoughts are tied to pain, but compassion disarms what force cannot. Mara appears most strongly when things are quiet. In moments of stillness, during meditation, at night before sleep, he comes dressed as restlessness, as doubt, as distraction. He says, "This silence is dangerous. Do something." And often people obey, not because they want to, but because silence becomes unbearable when they don't know how to hold what rises in it. But what if silence isn't empty? What if silence is just the space where truth waits beneath all the noise? When Mara says, "This isn't working," compassion replies, "I hear you, but I'm staying." When Mara says, "You're wasting time," compassion replies, "There is no rush." This gentleness is not weakness. It is the firm hand that chooses peace over panic. Even when Mara arrives with old memories, with guilt, with fear of the future, the approach remains the same. "Ah, you again. Sit with me." This invitation rewires the nervous system. It tells the body, "You are not under attack. You are not being chased. You are home." So much of suffering is not in the thought itself, but in the resistance to it. "I shouldn't feel this. This shouldn't be happening. Why is this back?" These thoughts compound the pain, but when resistance softens, The thought often dissolves on its own. Not instantly, but eventually, like a wave that crashes and then retreats back to sea. Mara thrives on urgency, on the belief that discomfort must be fixed now. But what if discomfort is just a signal, not a danger? What if the anxious thought is not a command, but a flare saying, "Look here, there is something unresolved." Ignoring it or fighting it will only delay healing. Sitting with it, gently, begins to unwind the knot. Letting go of the battle also means letting go of the idea that one must be constantly positive to be spiritual or enlightened or worthy. The Buddha did not reach peace by avoiding Mara. He reached peace by no longer needing to exile him. Peace does not mean the absence of inner struggle. It means the ability to be still within it. Thoughts lose power when they are not personalized. "I'm having a thought that I'm not good enough" is very different from "I'm not good enough." The first creates space. The second creates identity. That space, even if only a breath wide, is the key. In that space, there is choice. Choice not to believe, choice not to react, choice to stay seated in one's center. Over time, the visitations become less threatening, not because the thoughts disappear forever, but because the relationship to them is no longer hostile. They become like familiar clouds passing through the sky. Not welcome, but not alarming either. Just passing. Even when Mara visits in more disguised forms, comparison, perfectionism, envy, the same invitation applies. "Ah, this again. Sit with me." This allows for inquiry. What is this emotion protecting? What fear lives underneath? What unmet need is speaking here? This approach transforms what once felt unbearable into something that can be held, not controlled, not erased, but held, and that holding becomes healing. The mind learns that it is safe to feel, that no thought is too dark to be seen, that no feeling is too heavy to be carried with grace. And this does not mean indulging every thought. It means not fearing them. It means not giving them the steering wheel. It means learning to respond, not react, to pause before assuming, to breathe before believing. Even in daily life, Mara shows up, in a look that feels like judgment, in a silence that feels like rejection, in the flash of jealousy that arrives uninvited. But when recognized with compassion, these moments become openings. They teach, they reveal the hidden stories running beneath the surface. And when those stories are seen, they can be rewritten. The path of the Buddha is not about perfection, it is about liberation. Liberation from the cycle of self-inflicted harm, liberation from the compulsive need to control the mind. Liberation from the belief that peace comes from defeating something. True peace comes from no longer needing to fight. The last visit of Mara is a moment that echoes across centuries, not because it was dramatic, but because it was honest. The enlightened one still faced his shadow, but he no longer needed it to disappear. That is the deepest letting go, to let go of needing anything to be different before peace is possible. And so when negative thoughts arise, the question becomes, can this be met with kindness? Not agreement, not rejection, just presence. Because in that presence, Mara loses his edge. The thought loses its urgency. The storm loses its grip. This kind of living aware, compassionate, spacious, does not make life easy, but it makes life clear. And clarity is what dissolves illusion. The illusion that one must be fixed to be free. The illusion that only light is welcome. The illusion that shadows mean failure. In the end, Mara still visits, but he no longer stays. And that is enough. Not because he has been conquered, but because he has been understood, and what is understood cannot control. What is met with love cannot harm. The invitation, then, is not to wait for the storm to end, but to become the one who sits calmly as it passes. To welcome the final visit not as a threat, but as proof that nothing has been left unexamined, that no part of the self is unworthy of awareness. And in that final gesture of pouring tea for the one who once terrified, a new possibility is born, not of victory, but of wholeness, a wholeness that does not deny the shadow, but gently includes it in the light. That is the true end of the battle, not silence, but peace. The final notes of Mara's quiet departure still echo across the heart, like a bell that doesn't stop ringing. That silence, the one that follows when no more internal enemies are being fought, is not just peace, it is power. But what happens after one stops battling with what's inside? Where does all that energy go when it's no longer tangled in struggle? It turns outward. And one of the most radical directions it flows toward is generosity. Not generosity as it's usually framed, the kind that expects applause, acknowledgement, or at least a smile. This is the generosity that gives without leaving a hook behind. No waiting for thanks, no subtle control over how it's received, just the act of giving itself, free from conditions, free from identity, free from expectation. Most people give to feel good, which is not wrong, but it's still centered on the self. I feel generous. I like helping others. I want to make a difference. All beautiful intentions. But if peeled open deeply, they often reveal a desire to influence the world in a way that makes the giver feel secure, liked, or needed. That's not freedom. That's transaction dressed in virtue's clothing. Real generosity, the kind the Buddha spoke of, is not a performance or a bid for approval. It's a release, a letting go, a surrender of the urge to track, tally, or be remembered for kindness. Dana, the Pali word for generosity, was the very first step on the noble path, not because it's easy, but because it breaks the hardest thing, the grip of mine. When something is given without clinging, without the invisible leash of, I hope they notice, I hope they reciprocate, I hope this changes something, it becomes sacred, it becomes the act itself. And in that, the giver disappears, the receiver disappears, and only the giving remains. That is what it means to let go while giving. It's not giving up, it's giving through. This kind of letting go cannot be faked. The body knows when it's pretending. The heart knows when it's bargaining. Even the smallest internal voice, the one that lives beneath the smile, will whisper, I still wanted something from this. And that whisper is where the practice begins. Not in shaming the desire for return, but in seeing it clearly and softening into it. When giving becomes a mirror for our attachments, it becomes a teacher instead of a transaction. Letting go through generosity also dissolves control. So much of modern life is engineered around controlling outcomes, how others see us, how they respond, what they give back, whether they stay or leave. Even love is sometimes offered like a seed planted in hopes of a particular kind of bloom. But non-grasping generosity doesn't plant for a harvest. It lets the seed fall where it may. It accepts that some will grow, some won't, and some might be eaten by birds before they even reach the ground. And it doesn't follow up. It doesn't check the soil. It doesn't say, look what I did. It walks on, open and empty, with hands that remain outstretched, not to catch, but to release again. Even in speech, the practice shows itself. A kind word given without waiting for warmth in return is a form of freedom. A favor done without tracking how many favors are owed. A secret kept without needing the person to be grateful. Every time something is offered with open palms instead of clenched fingers, the internal tightness softens, and something profound shifts. The identity of the generous one, the narrative of the self as good, worthy, or enlightened, begins to dissolve too. True Dana strips away the storyteller. It doesn't feed the ego, it empties it gently. In this way, non-grasping generosity becomes a kind of purification. It burns the self-concern that hides inside even our best qualities. The act of giving becomes an undoing. Not a subtraction of worth, but a subtraction of burden. The burden of needing to be seen a certain way. The burden of managing how the world receives what we offer. When those layers peel back, what remains is raw, alive, and incredibly light. And it's not only about material giving. The most subtle gifts are the ones that most often go unnoticed, and that's precisely their power. Giving time without checking the clock. Giving attention without planning what to say next. Giving space for someone else's pain without shrinking away or trying to fix it. These are offerings that ask nothing in return, not even comfort. They don't need to be seen or praised to be real. In fact, their invisibility is what makes them sacred. There's also the paradox that the less we expect from our generosity, the more deeply it nourishes. When someone offers water to a stranger without knowing if it's appreciated, that gift becomes a moment of freedom. But when someone gives and waits to be thanked, even if silently, the giving turns into a debt ledger. It becomes heavy, and eventually, that weight turns into resentment. They didn't appreciate me. They didn't acknowledge what I did. But these statements reveal that the giving was never free. It was always a negotiation with a hidden clause. Appreciate me, or I'll suffer. In letting go of that clause, the suffering dissolves with it. Even in spiritual practice, generosity can become sticky with identity. Meditators who give time to others sometimes wrap their offerings in silent contracts. I did this for you, so you should see me as wise. Teachers who share knowledge may cling to being needed. Parents who sacrifice may secretly demand emotional repayment. None of this is shameful. It's human, but it's also imprisoning. Because as long as generosity is tied to self-image, it can never fully be a path to liberation. It only builds a more virtuous cage. So what does real letting go through generosity feel like? It feels like the moment after an exhale, that pause where nothing is clung to, nothing is expected, and nothing is owed. Just the clean release of something no longer needed, a kind of relief without conditions, a smile that lingers even when unnoticed, an offering that vanishes without a trace and leaves the soul lighter than before. Even more challenging is giving when it feels like there's nothing to give, not because of poverty, but because of exhaustion, hurt, or isolation. But sometimes the most radical generosity is not a thing or a word, but a pause, a breath taken for another person instead of a reaction, a willingness to listen even when we're tired, a decision not to pass judgment when it would feel so good to do so. These are not small things. They are tectonic shifts in a world addicted to reaction and retaliation. Generosity also reshapes how we view rejection. When something is given freely, rejection doesn't wound, because the giving wasn't a bid for connection, it was an act of inner release. If the other accepts it, wonderful. If they don't, it remains pure. And this frees the giver from the tyranny of needing validation to feel whole. It shifts the center of power inward. The choice to give becomes the liberation itself, not the outcome. There's even something profound in giving to those who may never know our name. The anonymous donation, the quiet kindness, the act no one sees. These expressions carry a kind of invisible nobility. They work on the soul like a gentle sanding down of the edges. They teach the giver more than the receiver. Because to be generous without being noticed is to finally step out of the spotlight and into stillness. Some might wonder if this form of giving is too passive, too empty, too detached. But that's the illusion of control speaking again. Non-grasping generosity is not indifference, it's intimacy without ownership. It's not less engaged, it's more surrendered. The world doesn't need more performative kindness. It needs hearts willing to give without claiming territory. People who plant trees under whose shade they will never sit. That's the kind of generosity that transforms both giver and world. At its deepest level, this kind of giving becomes an act of devotion, not to a god or a person, but to life itself. A bow to impermanence, a nod to the mystery, an offering made not to gain, but to participate, not to impress, but to dissolve. And in this dissolving, the lines blur between giver and gift, between one moment and the next, between self and other. What's left is silence, spacious, alive, and utterly free. Letting go of the need to be acknowledged for generosity is not weakness. It's the strength to love without asking the world to echo it back. It's the courage to disappear into the gesture. And in that disappearing, something astonishing happens. The more we let go, the more deeply we connect, not to a story about who we are, but to the boundless flow that never asks who we are in the first place. And that flow is where the next lesson quietly waits. Because if giving without needing is freedom, then what about receiving without fear? What happens when the ego steps aside not only in offering, but also in surrendering to care? The path does not end at the open palm. It continues into the open heart, and that is where we now go. When generosity has no grasping, when giving comes with no strings, a new kind of peace arises. But just when the heart begins to soften in that spaciousness, life brings another wave. Not a wave of gratitude, not a reward, but a surge of chaos, unpredictability, and emotion that does not respond to goodness with symmetry. That is where the next lesson begins, in the recognition that life does not follow the logic of fairness, but dances like the sea, rising, falling, surging, withdrawing, and in that rhythm, something vital waits to be seen. Most of the struggle comes from trying to fix life in place. People chase comfort, trap happiness in routines, organize calendars as if time could be tamed, love as if relationships could be frozen into perfection, and practice mindfulness as if peace could be bottled. But the wave does not ask permission to crash. The tides do not wait for readiness. The seasons do not ask if winter is convenient. Samsara is not a puzzle to solve, but an ocean to ride. And those who learn to surf the chaos become intimate with a deeper kind of strength, not the strength of resistance, but the strength of flexibility. The more one tries to tame samsara, the more brutal it becomes. Every plan disrupted, every dream delayed, every emotion misunderstood becomes a personal failure. The stories in the mind tighten around the neck. It starts to feel like life is happening to you. But that feeling is not because of life, it's because of the grip. The wave cannot be stopped, but the grip can be loosened. There's an old story of a monk who fell into a raging river. The current tossed him toward jagged rocks and over sharp drops. Spectators screamed from the banks, helpless. But the monk reappeared miles downstream, unharmed, laughing. When asked how he survived, he said, "I became the water." To become the water is not to surrender to despair. It is to stop bracing. It is to feel the direction of the current and move with it without losing oneself. That is the art of letting go of control without letting go of discernment. Surfing samsara means feeling the wave under your feet, but keeping your balance in the moment, not in the map. No one controls the ocean. But every surfer knows the rhythm of waves can be felt in the body, and that rhythm is enough. Buddhism never promised to end the ocean. It promises to end the illusion that you are its victim. Samsara includes birth and death, joy and grief, gain and loss. It spins the wheel without asking. But the heart that knows how to rest in the spin, how to breathe in the motion, becomes less shaken. This is not detachment by numbness. This is intimacy with impermanence. Control is seductive. It feels like safety. But what it produces is tension, anxiety, and an endless hunt for perfect outcomes. Control demands guarantees. Wisdom watches patterns. Control resists failure. Wisdom expects tides. Control builds walls. Wisdom rides waves. One of the most painful attachments is to emotional predictability. People often believe they should always feel a certain way: calm, productive, grateful, peaceful. When emotions change like the weather, they interpret it as weakness. But thoughts are waves, feelings are waves, moods are waves. Clarity comes, then it goes. It is not a problem to fix. It is a motion to observe. There is a beauty in the fleeting nature of experience. The ocean does not grieve the wave that just passed. It is already forming the next. The one who lets go of taming begins to ride the rhythm instead. And that rhythm becomes its own kind of peace, not because it eliminates chaos, but because it includes it without flinching. Trying to tame samsara leads to blaming oneself for every downturn. It creates shame around grief, guilt around anger, resistance to rest. It creates inner judges that whisper, "If you were more spiritual, you wouldn't feel this." But wisdom does not avoid the low tide. It sits with it. It does not try to speed up recovery. It listens to what sorrow teaches. A wave carries you farther when you stop thrashing. The same applies to sorrow. The same applies to confusion. Stillness is not always a destination. Sometimes it's what arises when resistance quiets. Letting go of the need to tame also means letting go of the illusion that progress is linear. One day you feel clear. The next, everything is fog again. This does not mean you are back at the beginning. It means the path is not a ladder, it's a spiral, and sometimes spirals double back before moving forward. Samsara is not a punishment. It is a teacher that refuses to speak in straight lines. It teaches through contrast, through texture, through the unexpected. And once it is no longer treated as an enemy, its lessons begin to land differently, not as disruptions, but as invitations to deepen the inner stance of balance. To surf samsara is to become a witness to both chaos and stillness with equal intimacy. It is to stop labeling days as good or bad, and instead greet each one with curiosity. The wave that crashes might be followed by the one that lifts. The joy that vanished may have left a silence wide enough to hear truth. The pain that came without warning might have softened something hidden. Sometimes, in the attempt to tame samsara, people chase enlightenment like a finish line. But what if enlightenment is not an escape from the wave, but a posture within it? What if the awakened ones are not those who float above reality, but those who laugh while soaked in its salt? The more one loosens the grip on outcomes, the more life begins to move again. It is often the chase that exhausts. It is the grasp that tightens pain. But the breath that returns to presence again and again becomes a surfboard in the storm. Balance is not stillness. It is adaptation. Even the Buddha sat under the Bodhi tree not to escape the world, but to understand it. Enlightenment did not erase the wave. It gave him the eyes to see it differently. The rains still came, illness still came, death still came, but fear, the need to tame, the illusion of control, those fell away. Every attempt to control another person's reaction, to script the timing of healing, to lock in a constant state of motivation or clarity, is a form of trying to tame the ocean. And every wave that breaks that expectation is an opportunity to ride something wilder, something real. Letting go of taming samsara is not passive. It is not carelessness. It is awareness that energy spent resisting could be used dancing, that the muscle used to clench could be used to paddle, that the voice used to blame could be used to sing. When you stop trying to tame the wave, you start hearing its rhythm. You stop yelling at the thunder and start listening to the rain. You stop measuring the worth of the day by what stayed in place and start learning from what moved. True resilience is not a hard shell. It is a soft center that can flex, adjust, shift, and still remain whole. The wave never breaks the ocean. In the same way, chaos never breaks the one who rides it with presence. Samsara may never be still, but the heart can be, and not because it hides, because it learns to breathe with the wave instead of against it. That is freedom, not from life, but with it. And still, even after letting go of the need to be thanked, even after loosening the grip on outcomes and praise, there is one more subtle place where control hides within the assumption that peace is a permanent achievement. As if once equanimity is tasted, it will remain. As if the mind, once clear, will never again stir. But waves don't apologize for rising after falling. They are not wrong for returning. The ocean is not broken because it never holds still, and this is where the next lesson begins. There are those moments when everything finally feels okay. Not extraordinary, not euphoric, but okay, in a way that feels enough. Then, without warning, a crash. Something shatters a plan, a mood, a hope, and all that stillness is gone. The reflex is to grasp again, fix it, make it stop, patch the hole and hold the ocean back with a bucket. But the wave is not the enemy. The chaos is not the failure. Samsara, this cycle of becoming, breaking, becoming again, is not a mistake. It is the dance of form and emptiness. And wisdom begins when the dance is no longer resisted. Trying to tame the chaos of life is like yelling at the tide for not keeping still. The mind builds fortresses out of expectations and calls it safety. But all things conditioned are impermanent. Every relationship, every thought, every breath arising and dissolving like foam. When the heart breaks, it is not proof of personal failure. When plans collapse, it is not karma gone wrong. These are the signatures of motion, not punishment. And when one sees this, not just intellectually but through the marrow of being, resistance begins to melt. Riding the wave does not mean liking every moment. It means no longer needing to control it. It means grieving without drowning, laughing without clinging, working without becoming the work. It means meeting each crest and fall with the same gaze, neither seduced by the high nor destroyed by the low. This is not detachment. This is intimacy with reality. There is a quiet strength in those who no longer demand that life be fair. Not because they've given up, but because they've seen that fairness is a human metric applied to a mystery too vast to calculate. Life unfolds not by fairness, but by interdependence. A butterfly flutters in the Amazon, and rain falls in Spain. A kind word uttered in a market 20 years ago becomes the reason someone does not give up today. When viewed this way, even the wave becomes a teacher. Most people wait for the storm to pass so they can feel calm. But the teaching of the Dharma is not about waiting. It's about seeing that even in the storm, there is something unshaken. There is a silence, not silenced by thunder, a stillness under the surface. The calm is not after the wave. The calm is inside the one who surfs it. And surfing doesn't require special talent. It requires presence, feet not anchored in sandcastles, but knees bent, heart open, and eyes awake. Pain becomes agony when it is labeled as wrong. Sadness becomes despair when it is labeled as failure. Samsara becomes suffering when it is resisted. The wave is not what breaks us. What breaks us is trying to control the rhythm of a universe that never signed our blueprint. The liberation is not in getting the ocean to be still. The liberation is seeing that we were never separate from it. Every attempt to tame life is an attempt to deny its wisdom. Control is often fear in disguise. It is the child who builds walls around their heart after one betrayal and forgets to open the gate again. It is the planner who micromanages the future to avoid past pain, only to find that life does not follow spreadsheets. Surrender is not the enemy of progress. It is its foundation. Because when we stop resisting, energy is freed. What was once used to fight the current is now used to float, to notice, to breathe. Even enlightenment, if grasped, becomes another chain. Even serenity, when clung to, becomes another desire. True freedom is not having it all figured out. It is being at peace even when nothing makes sense. It is bowing to the wave, not to worship chaos, but to acknowledge its inevitability. The bow says, "I see you, I won't run, teach me." There is a Zen story of a monk who asked his master, "How do I enter the way?" The master replied, "Do you hear the sound of the stream?" The monk nodded. "Enter there," said the master. The sound of the stream, the crash of the wave, the messiness of a breakup, the sting of rejection, the joy of birth, the grief of death, all of it. That is the way, not separate, not obstacles, but doorways. When we insist on taming every wave, we lose our curiosity. We become so busy trying to control the script that we forget to watch the play unfold. And sometimes, the plot twist is the exact medicine the soul needed. The lost job that made room for the calling, the breakup that broke the ego, the illness that returned one to what matters. Life is not a straight path to clarity. It is a spiral staircase where each step down is also a step up. Samsara is not just suffering. It is the teacher dressed in impermanence. It is the reminder that joy and sorrow wear the same face, just lit by different moons. And riding the wave does not mean bypassing pain. It means feeling it fully without building a dam. It means allowing tears to fall without turning them into a story of inadequacy. It means trusting that the wave has rhythm, even if it doesn't follow yours. The ego wants the wave to make sense. The heart just wants to feel it. And when one finally allows the heart to feel raw, tender, open, something shifts. Control begins to fade, not in defeat, but in trust. Trust that the wave will not carry you away. Trust that groundlessness is not the same as danger. Trust that surrender is not giving up, it is coming home. In surfing, one learns quickly that stiffness leads to falls. Rigidity is the opposite of balance. The body must sway, adjust, respond. So must the mind. The thoughts that say, "This shouldn't be happening," are like locked knees on a moving board. They cause collapse. But when the mind says, "This is what is," the muscles of resistance loosen, and with looseness comes grace. We do not become free by changing the waves. We become free by changing our relationship to them, by no longer believing that calm means control, by no longer seeking a life without motion, but a mind that can move with life, by realizing that wisdom is not the absence of difficulty, but the intimacy with it. To ride samsara's wave is to accept that life includes loss, unpredictability, death, and rebirth. It is to know that the self who clings cannot survive the ocean, but the self who bows becomes the ocean. No longer separate, no longer threatened, just a movement of water, aware of itself. And this awareness, gentle and wide, holds everything. The storm, the stillness, the desire to fix, the ache of not knowing, all of it is seen. And in this seeing, there is space. And in space, there is freedom. Not the freedom of control, but the freedom from needing it. The wave never promised to behave. It only promised to be real, and that's enough. The teaching is simple, but not easy. Stop trying to tame the wave. Learn to ride it. Let it carry you, crash you, teach you. And when you rise again, salt on your skin, hair in your eyes, heart open, you'll realize the wave was never the enemy. It was the path. Underneath the shimmering surface of every wave lies the ocean's depth, untouched, unmoved. And so the dance of chaos and surrender from before now leads into an even subtler unraveling, where the question is no longer about riding life's turmoil, but about realizing who or what is riding at all. If the wave is never permanent, neither is the surfer. And if identity keeps shifting like foam, maybe what we think we are was never truly the rider to begin with. There's a soft disorientation in realizing that the person who felt joy yesterday may not be the same one who feels sorrow today. Thoughts come and go, emotions rise and dissolve, bodies age, desires evolve. And yet, something clings. It insists on saying, I am my body. I am my sadness. I am this memory. I am these thoughts. But what if none of it is truly I? What if the very building blocks we assemble into a self-form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness are just like sandcastles in the tide? The Buddha didn't offer metaphysical puzzles to confuse people, he offered tools to see clearly. One of his most radical insights is the concept of the 5 aggregates, or skandhas. These are the components that make up what is commonly experienced as a person, not a soul, not an essence. Just a collection of processes, and each one is empty of a stable identity. They don't belong to anyone. They aren't fixed. They don't last. And yet they form the illusion of me. To begin loosening suffering, one must start here not by trying to destroy the aggregates, but by understanding them deeply enough to stop mistaking them for something they are not. Form is the physical body, the flesh, bones, skin, and sensory organs. It's the most obvious part of identity, yet also the most deceptive. The body constantly changes, skin renews. Muscles fatigue, hair falls. Disease and age shift the body's capacity. Still, society glorifies form as if it's a foundation. People sculpt it, decorate it, starve it, indulge it, believing they are beautifying the self. But form is not who is watching. It is what is watched. Just because it is the most visible doesn't mean it is the most real. Feeling arises next. Not emotions, but the immediate tone of experience, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Every encounter, every sound, every touch carries this tonal flavor. It's how the mind begins reacting, yet feelings are entirely dependent on conditions. A meal tastes delightful when hungry, bland when full. A breeze is a gift in summer, a curse in winter. Feeling is like weather. It rolls in, it rolls out. But what most do is attach to the pleasant and reject the unpleasant, trying to control something that cannot be pinned down. Craving is born here. So is aversion, and so is much of suffering. Then comes perception, the mind's labeling machine. It recognizes patterns, assigns names, links present experience with memory. A face is seen and labeled. Friend, stranger, threat, desire. A word is heard and instantly filtered through 1,000 associations. Perception organizes reality, but it also distorts, it oversimplifies. It carries the weight of bias, culture, trauma, and habit. Perception is not pure seeing, it is conditioned recognition, and yet people live inside it as if it's truth. Mental formations are perhaps the most subtle. These are the volitional tendencies, the impulses, habits, intentions, and emotional reactions shaped over years. When someone flinches at criticism, that's a mental formation. When jealousy arises, that too. They are not chosen in the moment. They erupt from the deep grooves of repeated reaction. These formations often operate beneath awareness, reinforcing the illusion of personality. I'm just an angry person. I've always been like this. But what is called personality is just a bundle of conditioned tendencies. Nothing permanent, nothing unchangeable, and certainly nothing solid. And finally, consciousness, the awareness that knows all the above. It seems like the most trustworthy. After all, isn't awareness what watches the thoughts, sees the colors, feels the feelings? But in Buddhist psychology, consciousness is not a monolithic observer. It's a flickering process that depends on contact with objects. Eye consciousness sees form. Ear consciousness hears sound. Each type arises and passes away depending on conditions. It is like a light that turns on only when a wire is touched. It's not a soul, it's not a witness, it's a function. To believe that consciousness is me is to confuse the mirror for the one looking into it. When these 5 aggregates are seen clearly, something strange and beautiful happens. The center starts to dissolve. There is no core self gluing them together. They arise together, codependent, but none can be pointed to as, "This is me." And without a self to defend, to promote, to fear for suffering begins to ease, not through force, not through denial, but through the gentle clarity of seeing. Letting go of the aggregates doesn't mean rejecting life. It means holding life more lightly. When pain comes to the body, it is simply form reacting. When sadness arises, it's a feeling, not a failure. When memories flood in, they are perceptions, not prophecies. When impulses shout inside the mind, they are formations, not destiny. And when awareness flickers, it is not proof of someone watching, but of processes unfolding. To live with this insight is to begin walking with a new kind of freedom, no longer needing to control every emotion, no longer needing to be right all the time, no longer needing to win the endless game of self-definition, because there is nothing to defend. There is just unfolding, and that unfolding doesn't belong to anyone. This isn't a cold detachment, it's the warmest embrace of reality. It's what allows compassion to rise. If the one who is angry is not really a fixed person, then maybe their anger is just a passing storm in their own skandhas. If the one who wronged is just a bundle of conditions, then perhaps forgiveness is no longer tied to ego. And if the one who suffers is not a solid me, then perhaps suffering can also shift, loosen, fade. In daily life, this shows up in the small moments. When a thought says, "I can't believe I did that," pause and notice the I. Is it a memory of form, a feeling of regret, a mental formation replaying shame? When frustration hits in traffic, can it be traced? Is it a perception of time wasted, a feeling of restlessness, a formation born of habit? When joy surprises you in a quiet moment, can you notice it arise not as something owned, but as something happening? Freedom doesn't come from transcending the world. It comes from seeing through the illusions that tighten it. The illusion of ownership, the illusion of permanence, the illusion of self. When the aggregates are met with curiosity instead of grasping, the whole world becomes less personal, less heavy, less threatening. This doesn't mean becoming passive. The aggregates still move, the body still eats, feelings still fluctuate, plans still form. But now, there's space, room to breathe between reaction and response. A loosening of identity, a softening of judgment, a release of the need to always be someone. And in that space, life still happens, but not as a performance. It unfolds like music played by an orchestra without a conductor. Each part doing its piece, each note rising and falling, no need for applause or perfection. Just sound, form, motion, awareness, all arising and passing. No one playing, nothing to possess. Just the song of existence, echoing softly through an empty stage. Just as clarity begins to settle like calm water over stirred mud, a new disturbance enters not from the world, but from within the pursuit itself. The insight into the 5 aggregates may have started to loosen identity and dissolve attachments, yet even in that loosening, a subtle desire remains, a craving to finally do it right, to be the most detached, the most awakened, the one who has let go completely. And that craving wears the disguise of virtue. It pretends to be surrender while secretly tightening control. When even the path to freedom becomes something to cling to, suffering takes on the robes of spirituality. There's a kind of quiet exhaustion that builds in those who strive too hard to be free, a feeling that no matter how much they meditate, reflect, or release, they're still not quite there, not calm enough. not wise enough, not detached enough. The spiritual ego whispers, "You should be beyond this by now." A true practitioner wouldn't feel this way. Let go harder. But in the very act of trying to perfect detachment, something precious is lost: the softness of being, the honesty of imperfection, the simple presence that needs no embellishment. Letting go is not an achievement. It's not a badge to earn or a mountain to climb. It's a moment-to-moment openness, a willingness to meet experience as it is, without needing to sculpt it into a spiritual ideal. But when the mind turns letting go into a goal, it begins chasing it like any other worldly prize. The language may change: liberation instead of success, non-attachment instead of control, but the inner grip tightens just the same. This trap of spiritual perfectionism is especially tricky because it masquerades as wisdom. It quotes sutras, it wears mala beads, it uses silence as a weapon and smiles through suppressed emotions. But its essence is the same as any egoic performance: the need to be someone special, someone awakened, someone above it all. And in that performance, the rawness of being human gets pushed aside. Vulnerability is hidden, confusion is denied, and pain, when it inevitably comes, is treated as a personal failure rather than a natural part of life. One of the most dangerous ideas in spiritual circles is that certain thoughts or feelings shouldn't arise. That once one has let go, things like jealousy, grief, or desire are signs of regression. But the truth is, emotions don't ask for permission. They don't care about your spiritual timeline. They arise because conditions ripen, because the nervous system reacts, because you're alive. To judge them as failures is to place another layer of shame on top of the already difficult experience. And that shame comes not from the Dharma, but from the ego wearing a Dharma mask. The Buddha never taught that awakening was about becoming a perfect robot who no longer feels. He pointed to a freedom that includes emotion, that holds space for the mess, that lets experience arise and pass without adding layers of meaning. But to arrive there, one must be willing to let go of even the desire to arrive. To see that striving to let go is still striving, that craving not to crave is still craving, that becoming obsessed with non-attachment is just another flavor of attachment. It's not easy to recognize this pattern because it feels so noble. Who doesn't want to be free of suffering? Who doesn't want to let go of ego, greed, fear, and control? But when those goals turn into spiritual trophies, the path becomes a competition, quiet, internal, but relentless. And soon, the inner world is filled not with peace, but with constant measuring. Was I mindful enough today? Did I respond like a true practitioner? Am I enlightened yet? True freedom doesn't come from winning that game. It comes from stepping off the field entirely, from realizing that awakening is not a linear climb, but a deepening into what already island, that letting go is not something done, but something allowed. That spiritual growth doesn't always look like progress. It often looks like breaking down, falling apart, grieving what was, and meeting what's here with tenderness instead of judgment. There's a deep relief that washes over those who finally stop trying to be the perfect spiritual person, who let themselves cry without labeling it attachment, who admit to anger without needing to suppress it under layers of faux equanimity, who rest in their confusion without rushing to solve it with a quote from a teacher, because in those raw moments, something more honest begins to emerge. Not the polished self who has mastered detachment, but the humble presence that doesn't need to. And here lies the great paradox. The moment one lets go of letting go, real release begins. Not because they tried harder, but because they stopped interfering. The grasping to be free ceases. The tension around being tensionless dissolves. And what's left is simplicity, unadorned, unedited, and beautifully flawed. This is not a dismissal of the path. Discipline, meditation, reflection, ethics, all of these matter. But they are not tickets to purity. They are tools for awareness, not weapons of self-judgment. When used gently, they open the heart. When turned into rigid ideals, they close it. The difference lies in intention. Is practice being used to support life or to escape it? To deepen understanding or to perform it? Sometimes the greatest act of letting go is to admit you haven't, to stop pretending, to drop the act, to let yourself be messy, real, unfinished. To trust that awakening doesn't require your performance, it requires your presence. And presence is never perfect. It is enough as it island. Even in meditation, this trap shows up. The mind says, "Let thoughts go," and then begins scolding itself for having them. It says, "Return to the breath," then punishes itself for wandering. But what if the wandering isn't the problem? What if the judgment is? What if the real letting go is not forcing the mind into silence, but noticing the noise without getting tangled in it? That's where peace begins, not in controlling the mind, but in befriending it. Spiritual perfectionism also loves to compare. That teacher seems so serene. That friend seems so unattached. And soon, practice becomes a race against other people's masks. But what's shown on the outside is never the full truth. Everyone has their edge. Everyone wrestles with some shadow. And the most awakened ones are usually those who no longer need to prove it. The path to peace isn't paved with polished moments. It's made of missteps, stumbles, returns. It's not linear. It spirals, loops, circles back. It confuses. It clarifies. Then it confuses again. But underneath it all, there's a current of something steady, an awareness that doesn't need fixing. And that awareness doesn't demand that you let go perfectly. It meets whatever's here with a quiet yes. To let go of the letting go is not to become passive. It's to become real, to show up fully, to meet the moment without the added burden of needing it to be anything else. That kind of presence is powerful, not because it controls experience, but because it stops pretending it can. When you drop the pressure to be awakened, something shifts. The shoulders lower, the breath deepens, the eyes soften, and the heart, no longer needing to perform detachment, begins to open. Not just to joy, but to sorrow. Not just to clarity, but to confusion. And in that openness, a different kind of freedom arises, the kind that isn't fragile, because it doesn't depend on getting everything right. The teachings were never meant to become another cage. They were keys. But even keys can be clung to. Even maps can be mistaken for the journey. And even the idea of awakening can become an obstacle if held too tightly. So breathe. Return to the messy now. Drop the need to be the most detached person in the room. Drop the shame of not having let go perfectly. Drop the story that you're behind on some invisible path. There's nothing to catch up to. There's only this moment, waiting to be met with tenderness. And maybe that's the real awakening, not an escape from being human, but a return to it, fully, authentically, without needing to achieve the perfect version of anything. Letting go is not a final destination. It's a rhythm, a movement, a dance. And the dance continues, not when you master the steps, but when you stop gripping the floor. Just as the illusion of perfect detachment quietly shattered under the weight of its own striving, another truth begins to surface, one that no one escapes. Even the compulsion to let go, even the ego dressed in robes of spirituality, fades when faced with the one teacher that doesn't bend to illusion, death. While the ego can disguise itself in spiritual masks, death strips away every mask. It does not wait for readiness. It doesn't ask if one has mastered the breath or memorized sutras. It doesn't care how enlightened a person believes they are. Death is not a punishment. It is not a failure. It is the most honest presence in all of life. and it teaches by taking away everything that cannot be held. This is not a reflection meant to inspire fear. Quite the opposite. Fear clings to the fantasy that things could last forever. Fear begs for more time, more control, more chances to arrange life just right. But the Buddhist view of death does not come from fear. It comes from clarity. Death is not the enemy of life. It is what makes life urgent, vivid, impossible to hoard. It invites a different relationship with time, one that isn't about squeezing the most in, but about letting go of what no longer matters. The awareness of death is not morbid. It is liberating because it exposes the great lie of permanence. And with that lie gone, there is nothing left to protect, nothing to arrange, nothing to postpone. Just presence. So much of control is rooted in the illusion that time is abundant, that the right moment will come later, that life can be planned like a spreadsheet. But death reveals how fragile those assumptions are. Plans get interrupted, people disappear, clocks run out, and in that sudden clarity, many realize they spent years clinging to trivial things, petty arguments, imagined futures, old grudges, unfulfilled expectations. Entire lives poured into trying to hold together a version of the world that was never going to stay still. In Buddhist teachings, death is not hidden or sugar-coated. Monks meditate in charnel grounds, surrounded by the decaying remains of bodies. They reflect on the stages of decomposition, not to traumatize themselves, but to see clearly that the body, too, is a changing thing, that no identity, no possession, no relationship is beyond the reach of impermanence. This kind of contemplation is not meant to make one numb or cynical. It is meant to make one awake, wide awake to what actually matters, to what is fleeting, to what is worth releasing. When the truth of death is faced directly, a strange tenderness often follows, not despair, but deep compassion. Because it becomes obvious how much everyone is trying to hold together lives they will eventually lose. Even those who seem confident, stable, in control, they too are moving toward the same destination. And when that is seen clearly, it softens judgment. It quiets the need to dominate. It whispers, "Let go. You don't have to carry all this." And in that moment, the weight of control begins to lift. What dies is not just the body. Expectations die, roles die, stories die, entire versions of the self dissolve. And yet, people continue trying to freeze their lives into predictable patterns, as if that could outwit change. But control is not strength, it is resistance. And resistance is always broken by time. What endures is not the structure of life, but the depth of presence within it. The love given freely, the moments lived fully, the breath that was truly felt. These cannot be hoarded or preserved, but they leave traces that linger beyond memory. Death also exposes the false urgency of so many daily concerns. The rush to be right, the need to win an argument, the obsession with status. These all crumble when held against the reality of impermanence. What remains, often, is a desire to forgive, to simplify, to be kind. Not because these are morally superior, but because they're what makes sense when time is short. And time is always short, even for those who feel young, healthy, untouchable. No one knows how many breaths are left, but each one is a chance to loosen the grip. Letting go because of death is not resignation. It is alignment with what is already true. It is moving with the current rather than against it. It is saying, if this moment is all I have, I will meet it fully without needing to fix it. And from that place, priorities begin to shift. Holding grudges seems foolish. Postponing love feels reckless. Clinging to appearances loses its charm. What remains is presence, not performative presence, but the kind that is quiet, attentive, open, Even fear of death changes in this light. The fear is often not of dying itself, but of not having truly lived, of realizing too late that the most important moments were missed in the name of control. Buddhist practice does not promise immortality. It offers clarity. It says, "You are dying, but while you live, wake up. Let go of what cannot stay. Meet what's here." That kind of presence doesn't resist death, it bows to it, and in doing so, discovers a richer way of living. Some people wait for death to teach them this. A diagnosis, a close loss, a sudden accident. But the teachings invite us to learn without waiting, to reflect now, to sit with the truth that life is not guaranteed, that breath is not owed, that tomorrow is not promised. And in that reflection, something opens a freedom not based on escape, but on surrender. Not apathy, but clarity. Not giving up, but giving in to what's real. Control loses its grip in the face of death, because control is built on the illusion of permanence. But when one stops trying to protect a life that will change anyway, energy is freed, the hands unclench, the heart becomes more generous, there is less to prove, and that gentleness begins to spread into every interaction, not because one became wiser, but because death reminded them what matters. In relationships, the awareness of death brings urgency to forgiveness. It invites truth where silence once lived. It encourages the words, "I'm sorry, I love you, thank you," not as rituals, but as real offerings, because at some point they will no longer be possible. Every encounter becomes a goodbye in disguise, not to create sadness, but to inspire sincerity. In goals, the awareness of death brings simplicity. It cuts through the noise of ambition and reminds us that achievement without presence is hollow, that being admired is not the same as being known, that being busy is not the same as being alive. When death becomes part of the inner conversation, the need to impress starts to fade. What remains is a hunger for authenticity, to live a life that feels honest, even if it looks small from the outside. In solitude, the awareness of death brings reverence. Each quiet moment becomes sacred, not because it is grand, but because it is finite. A cup of tea, a walk in the morning. The weight of a pet in the lap, none of it repeats the same way. And knowing this makes it luminous, not in a dramatic way, but in a gentle, heart-deep kind of way. This is not about glorifying death, it's about letting death clarify life. About letting it whisper, again and again, let go of what doesn't matter. Let go of control. Let go of delay. Because so many things are postponed in the name of some future stability. But that future never arrives in the way one hopes. And so life becomes a waiting room. The teachings of death open the door and say, "You're already in it. Live." Even practice itself can become a place of control, a checklist, a performance. But death asks, will this matter when the breath stops? That question is not to dismiss practice, but to deepen it, to remove the layers of striving, to bring it back to presence, to use it not as a ladder to enlightenment, but as a way to meet what's real. Buddhism teaches that everything conditioned will pass, not as a warning, but as a truth. This includes joy, pain, praise, blame, success, failure, the very identity one holds. And when that truth is not just understood, but felt, a great peace can arise. Not the peace of control, but the peace of not needing it. Letting go because time doesn't wait is not a threat. It's an invitation to love without holding back, to speak with honesty, to simplify the day, to rest in the body, to breathe deeply and mean it, to see beauty in what will end, to stop treating life like something to master and instead receive it as something to bow to. There is no schedule for this kind of letting go. It happens gradually, sometimes in waves, sometimes in moments of crisis, sometimes in the stillness of an ordinary day. But when it comes, it doesn't remove sorrow, it removes resistance to sorrow. It doesn't erase fear, it lets fear arise without needing to fix it. It doesn't promise eternal peace, it promises that even peace will change. And so life is lived, not in spite of death, but illuminated by it. The heart opens wider, the breath slows down, the hand releases what it once held too tightly. And in that softening, there is space for gratitude, for presence, for love that does not cling. Not because it is indifferent, but because it is awake, awake to what passes, awake to what remains, awake to the gift of being here, now, even if just for a little while. And so, as the wisdom of death reminds us that holding on is not only futile but unnecessary, what remains is a silence so honest it doesn't need to be filled. It is in that silence that the next doorway opens. Not one made of thoughts or aspirations, but one that starts at the soles of your feet. To walk, not to get somewhere, but simply to meet this moment, not to escape, but to be embraced by the ground itself. The wind doesn't ask where it's going. The stream doesn't question its flow. There is a kind of dignity in simply moving without urgency, in existing without needing to earn one's place in the world. Mindful walking is not just a slower way of getting around. It's a practice of intimate presence, a rebellion against the need for arrival, a reminder that everything already island, the ground beneath the foot is always new, always offering a chance to begin again. And yet the mind keeps insisting, like a passenger on a train with no stations, that it must be somewhere else by now. The habit of chasing outcomes is so deeply woven into the fabric of daily life that even simple movement becomes a race. The walk from one room to another becomes an errand. The stroll becomes a workout. The journey becomes a judgment of whether time was well spent. Walking meditation slices through this conditioning like sunlight through morning fog. It turns each step into an act of rebellion against the notion that life must be justified. When attention drops into the heels, the ankles, the shifting weight, the quiet roll of motion, suddenly, the body is not a vehicle, it becomes the temple. This kind of walking is not about posture or performance. It has no audience, no final destination. It is not meant to be productive, it is meant to be honest. Each footfall is a bow to the earth, not because one is subservient, but because one is awake. The ground does not need worship. It simply offers stability without complaint. How strange it is that the floor beneath our feet, the path we tread daily, could hold the gateway to release, if only we stopped trying to rush across it. To walk mindfully is to remember that presence is not a luxury. It is the only time anything real happens. The future is forever out of reach. The past is a shadow cast by memory. But the step being taken now, the shift of muscle and bone, the whisper of breath is the only living truth. There's nothing abstract about walking. It is the clearest expression of the body being here, alive, real. And yet it is so often done, half asleep. Try slowing down, not just to be slow, but to feel the difference between pushing and yielding. One step, then another. Not to cover ground, but to uncover it. The feet don't merely carry the body. They listen, they respond, they adjust to unevenness, soften into the curve of the earth. When movement is met with awareness, even the tiniest shifts become revelations. The way the toe meets the ground, the way the knee follows, the way the breath weaves into the rhythm. There is music in it all, but it can only be heard when the mind stops narrating and starts sensing. There is no need to walk in silence. Noise, like breath, like thought, is part of the landscape. A dog barking, a truck reversing, a child laughing. They don't have to be filtered out. They can be felt in the same way wind brushes the skin, not as intrusions, but as invitations. Each sound becomes part of the present symphony, and walking becomes the conductorless orchestra of awareness. There is no score, no tempo to maintain, only the gentle unfolding of one moment into the next. Many carry tension in their walk without realizing, the shoulders tight, the neck stiff, the jaw clenched, as if the walk must be purposeful to be worthwhile, as if relaxing into the body's natural rhythm is somehow wasteful. But when the attention drops from the head into the chest, from the chest into the belly, from the belly into the hips and feet, there's a cascading release, not just muscular, but psychological. The need to go somewhere dissolves. What's left is a rare kind of permission to be here, without needing a reason. The most difficult part of walking meditation is not learning to walk slowly. It's letting go of the mind's obsession with finishing. It will offer every excuse that this is pointless, that there are better things to do, that nothing is being achieved. It will itch with discomfort, not because the walk is wrong, but because it threatens the illusion that fulfillment lies somewhere else. The longer one walks without a purpose, the more the illusion cracks. Eventually, the walk walks itself. There's something deeply healing about meeting the earth with attention. No one has to be enlightened to benefit from this. No spiritual identity is required. The body knows how to move. The ground knows how to support. All that's needed is the willingness to let go of the idea that movement must always mean progress. Walking without arriving is not failure, it is freedom. In ancient Buddhist monasteries, monks have long practiced kinhin formal walking meditation as a counterpart to seated meditation. It was not an afterthought, it was the continuation of presence. Between sittings, the monks would walk slowly in circles, each step deliberately paced with the breath. Not because they were fragile, but because they were cultivating strength, not the kind that conquers, but the kind that endures. What they discovered is still true. The mind cannot sprint when the body refuses to. When the body leads, the mind follows, whether it likes it or not. And in that reversal of authority, something sacred emerges. Thought no longer commands. It listens. It harmonizes with the body's pace. And just like that, control transforms into coordination. The inner chatter starts to fade, not because it is silenced by force, but because the body's truth rings louder. Modern life is allergic to slowness. The culture celebrates speed, optimization, productivity. To walk without hurrying is seen as laziness or luxury, but that's only because stillness is misunderstood. Walking meditation is not about moving less, it's about moving with clarity. And clarity does not arrive through hurry, it arrives through attention. There is no formula for how fast or slow one must go. The speed of presence is not measured in distance, it's measured in intimacy. How fully one feels the weight of the body, the contact with the floor, the texture of air against skin, the subtle rocking of the spine. This intimacy is not limited to monasteries. It belongs to anyone willing to return to their steps. A hallway can be a meditation path. So can a sidewalk, a grocery store aisle, a quiet garden, a rooftop, a driveway. The space does not sanctify the practice, the awareness does. And the gift of walking meditation is that it transforms the mundane into the sacred without needing permission. It does not ask the world to be quiet. It invites one to hear more clearly. There are moments when walking like this begins to feel like being walked, as if something larger than thought has taken over. Not possession, but participation. A belonging to something older than personality, deeper than memory. The rhythm of earth meeting foot, breath meeting sky, attention meeting motion. This is the rhythm of life beyond control. And yet, there will be days when the mind resists, when the urge to accomplish reasserts itself, when walking without a goal feels like foolishness. This is not failure. It is the mind returning to its training. And each time presence is chosen again, even for one step, the training begins to shift. One step is enough. It always has been. There's no certificate at the end, no enlightenment badge, just a quieter heart, a more stable breath, a body less at war with itself. These are not small things. These are the quiet revolutions that make life worth living, not because they change everything on the outside, but because they change the relationship to everything on the inside. To walk without arriving is not to wander aimlessly. It is to move intentionally without being enslaved by outcome. It is to reclaim the step as a unit of presence, not progress. It is to meet the ground as a companion, not a platform to conquer. And in that shift, control loses its grip. Not because it was defeated, but because it was outgrown. So if the next walk leads nowhere, let it be enough. Let it be a homecoming, not a delay. Let the world pass by in its rush. Let the deadlines wave from a distance. Let the phone remain untouched. The feet know the way, the breath knows the rhythm, the heart knows the truth. Arrival was never the point, presence always was. When control slips through the fingers, peace quietly enters. Every teaching in this journey, whether from the waves of samsara, the illusion of the five aggregates, or the simple act of walking without arriving, was a gentle reminder. Freedom begins where control ends. If something here spoke to your heart, leave a comment below. It may help someone else find their own release. And if you'd like more teachings like this while you rest, don't forget to subscribe. Let the letting go continue.